Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Warthog. Now if you haven't seen the release videos or any of our live streams, the FT Warthog is probably our largest, most intense build that we've ever made to date, but that does not mean that it's difficult. We put a lot of heart and soul into making sure that anyone can build this and anyone can also fly this. Now as always, we have free downloadable plans. If you want to scratch build along with us, you're going to need over 11 sheets of foam and also you're going to need to print out the free plans. If you choose to support us by going to the store and get all the wood kit, you can go ahead and do that and build along with us. Now keep in mind with our plans, black is cut through, red is score cut, and blue is indicator line. Dan Sponholz did a wonderful job on these plans and I hope that you guys have a great experience with them. One thing I'm really excited about is we are going to be building the speed build kit with our new FT radial motors. We're using our FT radial 2218 motors. This gives us about 20% more power, 4S capability, and more efficiency than the originals. Both the original C twin pack and the FT radial motors will work for this project. So to get started on our wings, we're first going to build our spars. The spars give the main structure and also form to the wing on the inside. So we have our center section and then we have our two outer panels of our wings. Ultimately, all three of these sections are going to connect together. But first we want to put our attention into making sure that your pieces are retrieved and look exactly like this. Once we have these pieces out, we're going to go ahead and take our razor blade and we're going to dull the tip of it and we're going to drag it through down to the paper. So dulling the tip of our razor blade gives us the ability to go all the way down to the paper without cutting through. Go ahead and lightly drag your razor blade down through each side, not going through the paper on the bottom, and make sure those channels are going to pop out nice and easy when we fold it over. To open up the channels, it's very simple. We can fold this over 180 degrees, lay it on the table, and simply roll it out. If you notice that the pieces come apart unclean, you can go ahead and just cut a little bit deeper, get closer to the paper, and it should roll right out in your hand. For this last piece, I like to just use the table as my friend, just roll it right down like you see here. If you ever have any little scraps of foam, you can always take the edge of your blade and just scrape it off. Once we've got all of our cavities cleared out, take a moment and make sure that your three pieces look exactly like you see here. Don't be afraid to pause this video at any time to make sure you can do the step fully or if you need to recap. So I'm going to go ahead and take my two outer wing panels aside and I'm going to focus on our main spar in the center of the wing. This is an A-fold, which means the side plates are going to be above the bottom plate. With all of our designs, that technique is common. A-folds always mean one thing, B-folds always mean the other thing, double bevels, etc. So take care whenever we talk about these techniques to follow them exactly, but also on our kits, oftentimes you'll see a sketch mark that will kind of give you an indication. Now this is our bottom plate, this is our top plate. Our side plates are going to be orientated just like you see here. We're actually going to start with this piece that you see here, and the first thing we're going to do is just do a practice A-fold. Here's our side plate, here's our bottom plate. Notice when I keep it against the table that it's firmly up against and it makes a perfect A-fold. Once we're happy that we have a nice clean 90-degree angle, we can go ahead and go and put a bead of glue focusing most of the glue on the bottom surface of the side plate, and we're going to stop and start about a ½ inch or so from the edge. This just keeps glue from squirting out. We're going to now rotate this up 90 degrees and we can hold it. Now anytime you can use a square or anything to get yourself a perfect 90 degrees angle, I'd strongly encourage you to do so. If you don't have the basic tool to build these kits, we have something called a crafty kit, which gives you all the tools you need to build any of our designs. Alright, we've given this about 30 seconds to dry. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees and we're just going to do a practice fold on the other side. Anytime you do a practice fold, it's just a really great indication that everything is going to fit. It also gives you a muscle memory exactly what you need to do. We always check to make sure we have our A-fold and it's not up and wrong. You'll notice that if it's wrong, it'll just not feel natural. So this looks wonderful. Again, we're going to focus our glue, starting and stopping about a ½ inch from the edge, putting our glue on the very bottom of the plate. No need to rush on any of this. Up 90 degrees. Always look at both corners. Make sure that we have it firmly against the table and we're pressing down, getting a nice hard 90-degree angle. Alright, our 30 seconds is up. It's looking really good. Notice that these two pieces are nice and parallel from each other. That's exactly what we want to see. Our last step here is to take this down to the table. We're going to rotate this over. Notice I'm always trying to keep the glue on the table and not on our fingers. And we'll rotate this up 90 degrees like you see here, completing our spar. That looks really good, so I can go ahead and open this up. I'm going to kind of pull this over at 180 degrees. Once again, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. Notice I'm kind of favoring that glue kind of half on the paper, half on the foam. So one really cool thing, and it's actually coated in this table, waterproofing spray. It takes out that stress of gluing it to the table. It always breaks free, and you don't have to clean the table nearly as often. Our 30 seconds is up. We are good to go. We have our first spar done. We're going to do the exact same process in the same order on our outer wing panels now. So once again, we have our piece. We're going to start from the piece that doesn't have the paper bevel. We're going to go ahead and just test it up again. That looks great. Back to our glue. Up 90 degrees. Focus it right on that bottom plate there. Up 90 degrees. Now if you guys don't have something that has like a silicone base on it where the hot glue will just fleck off, make sure every 15 seconds or so you just kind of give it a little bit shift back and forth. This is going to keep it from gluing to your table. One last section here. Of course, we're always going to do a test fold. Okay. I'm just going to open this up with my fingers, popping it down, pressing against the table and also pressing it in. Okay, one more spar to go. Do a quick test fold. All three of our spars are now done. We're ready to move on to the next step. We're going to go ahead and prepare our wing surfaces, both the center and the outer panels, to receive the spars. The first one we're going to start with is our center section. So let's go ahead and find the outer wing panel that is a rectangle. So here we have our 3 wing panels. The center wing panel is the one we're going to focus on first, and then the 2 outer panels. Let's go ahead and do the same process that we did before and clear out these channels and also pluck all the foam out of the open areas that we need to remove. So we have all 3 of our pieces weeded out. Go ahead and take a moment and even pause it if you need to make sure all 3 pieces look exactly like you see here. There's going to be one more step that we're going to want to do to prepare all 3 of these pieces before the spars go on. That's going to be to do a double bevel on the line here, the line here, and the line right here. This is going to be where your leading edge is. The leading edge is going to be the front portion of your wing that basically breaks the air. Easiest way to tell the bevel cut is take where our channel is, go to the closest line to it, and that will be our leading edge. So the easiest way to do a bevel cut is to go ahead and fold where the leading edge is going to be 180 degrees, just like you see here. And then we're going to take this down to the table, and forgive my weird posture, I just want you to be able to see it. We're going to hold our angle of our blade at a sharp angle like this. We don't want to do it 90 degrees because it's going to make the blade wander. We're going to place the paper and the razor blade just above it. So here's the paper and the razor blade is just above it. You can see I have that real sharp angle there. And we're simply going to go ahead and drag it through, keeping as close to the paper as possible without going through. You can always do this in practice on a scrap piece of foam if you're nervous. And if you go through, you can repair it with a piece of tape on the other side. Same process as before, just above the paper, all the way through. Notice it's not perfect, but it'll do just fine. Ready? And don't worry, if there's some areas that don't look very good, you can always go back and clean it up. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process now to the other 2 wing panels. We are now ready for our next step. We have our channels cleared and our double bevels cut. Let's go ahead and remove the outer wing panels and put our attention towards the center one. So before we move over, go ahead and pause the video if you need, but make sure your 3 wing panels look exactly like what you see here. So we have our centerpiece here, and the first thing we're going to do is address this area here. This is going to kind of be the sub-spar. This is where the wing's going to go down and it's going to give it some rigidity further back on the wing. To do this, we're going to do an A-fold. Now we've done A-folds on our spars before, so this is our side plate. We're going to keep it firmly against the table. And we're going to rotate this up 90 degrees, pushing down firmly. That looks really good. Now that we've done that motion, we can go ahead and go back, place our glue, starting and stopping about a ½ inch from the edge, and focusing mostly on the bottom of the side plate. Right up to a 90-degree angle. And let that dry for about 45 seconds. So we're going to bring back our spar, our center section of spar. You're going to notice here that it's just pretty much exactly the same size. We have 2 holes that are going to match up to each other. I'm going to go ahead and place some glue on the top surface here, and then I'm going to glue this down, making sure I line this up perfectly with the 2 creases as you see here. Now, a typical thing on our old designs is we used to have people drag a barbecue skewer through these different ring creases. We no longer do this because we have a better method that gives you a lot more strength. So don't open up these channels where the wing is going to bend. Okay, that looks really good. We'll go ahead and place some glue down. Just flip it over. And again, here are my 2 different lines, my 2 different score cuts. We're going to line that up as carefully as possible. You can stick it down. And while it's stuck down, we can even go to the other side and make sure that the holes line up exactly. Once everything lines up good, go ahead and just leave it down on the table for about 45 seconds. Make sure everything is firmly pressed together. So our spar is now done. We're going to go ahead and lightly cover this over, and you're going to see it's kind of fall into place really nicely. This back edge is just going to touch the table if we did everything right, and it does. While we have this, I'm going to bring this to the edge of the table. I'm going to flip it over. What we should see is our spars pretty closely lining up. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to take note of this, because this is going to have a certain bevel, or a certain angle right here. Lining these holes up is going to give you that exact airfoil that you're looking for. Make sure we have plenty of hot glue in our glue gun. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a bead of glue down right here. And another one down against this edge here. We're going to do the same process we just did. We're going to fold this over. We're going to fold it down for a couple seconds. We're using the table as a friend, keep everything nice and perpendicular. But then we're going to go back and we're going to make sure that our holes line up on both sides. If they don't, kind of move it and hold it, and then press it at the table where you find it. The biggest thing is we want to keep everything square. We don't want this wing surface moving back and forth this way. So just take your time. If you're not happy with it, don't put glue on until you're ready to complete it. Alright, 30 seconds has passed. You're going to notice now our wing has a form. It's much stronger now. We can go ahead and we can take some hot glue, put it on our spars, and put it on our leading edge. Right back down to the table. I'm going to give this about maybe 10-15 seconds. Just do a really quick peek. Make sure everything's lining up really good, and it is. Back down to the table for the rest of the time. Our 45 seconds is over. We're now going to go ahead and we're going to open this back channel up. We're going to place our glue right down in that crease. And also right on the top here. Try not to cover that with my hand there. And now all of our focus is going to be on just making sure that back trailing edge is pressed nice and firm against the bottom of the table. Notice I'm never pushing hard or putting focus or wrinkling the foam. You don't have to force anything if you're doing this right. Give this a good minute to dry while holding it in place, so just so you have a really good strong glue joint and everything is nice and square. Our center wing panel is now done. A couple of things I kind of want to point out that will give you a good indication that everything is going to be smooth sailing. Notice that these joints here are all nice and flush with each other. That means that your wing is nice and square, and it's going to most likely receive these outer panels perfectly. Alright, let's go ahead and put this aside, and let's go ahead and do the same process now on our outer wing panels. So So one thing I want to point out, obviously on the last panel it's not going to matter, but we have two spars that look very, very similar together. But if you take note, there's more than a 90-degree angle. And also there's a pretty cool angle here. It tapers on both ends in both directions. Only one of these spars are going to match up the inner score lines and this index line perfectly. So if we do the wrong one, you're going to notice immediately when we lay it down, it's going to look like it's good, but you're going to see it just simply does not line up with the index mark that you see. When we do the right one, again, we're going to latch servo hole to servo hole. You're going to see it's a perfect fit. Find the right spar and then take this spar and remove it completely from the picture. Alright, I'm going to open this up and I'm going to mirror this, just like you see here. And I'm going to go ahead and do my A-fold on the back side here. 90 degrees, everything looks wonderful. There we go, we'll just hold that in place. Now once again, I'm going to put my attention here. I'm just going to line these up exactly with this edge plate on both sides here and here. A little bit of glue. Flipping it over. All my focus here, I'll just rotate this 180 degrees. All my focus is getting on the inside of these score cuts and lining up with this line perfectly. If the top servo hole is off just a little bit, don't worry about that. We're going to cut that up and match it up perfectly shortly. Same process as before now. Notice I'm not going to be doing this outer wingtip. Once we get the wing folded together, I'll go ahead and fold that up. We're going to go ahead and fold this over, nice and slow. Not putting any extra stress on this. Notice that we have a little bit of control over where our edge goes. So while I have this folded over, I want to kind of point out one thing. You're going to notice that these lines go up and match perfectly on the bottom and top surface. This one here is 90 degrees. Don't worry about that, that's just fine. Our main focus when doing this is we're going to want to make sure that this main spar bottom surface is almost perfectly aligned with the bottom surface. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my center section of my wing. I'm just going to kind of hold this in place. Just going to use this just for a little bit of peace of mind, make sure everything looks like it's going to line up beautifully. This is a really great time where we can kind of use this wing and we can gauge it to get a perfect match. The better it meets is the more strength you're going to have and the better it's going to look. With the wing folded over but not glued yet, I'm going to go ahead and bring my center section here, and you're going to notice when I bring the two leading edges and trailing edges together there's a gap in the center. And that's just fine because this wing is going to have something called dihedral, which gives it stability. When this rotates up, that gap is going to close and we're going to have the perfect amount of dihedral that we need. What we're looking for right now is we want to make sure the leading edge, the trailing edge, the spars, and all the creases for the top surface of the wing match up beautifully. If they do, you're ready to start gluing it down in the same order that we did their last step. Let's go ahead and keep this aside. We'll kind of use that as our gauge. Plenty of glue in my hot glue gun. I'm going to focus my glue down here and up against the spar. Fold it over again. I don't really need to lift it off the table. I can kind of just match that up by eye, just like you see here. Alright, so our 45 seconds have passed. Now you notice that we have our airfoil. Our next step here is to go ahead and apply glue on our leading edge and the bottom of the spar. Let's come right back down to the table, right up against our center section. Once we're sure we have that, I'm going to go ahead and just move my hand so both the outer and the inner portion of the spars get the same amount of pressure. Notice I'm always using the flats, even with my fingertips. I'm not pushing down with my fingertips, I'm just holding down. The more you can spread out force, the better off. Give this a good 45 seconds. Don't cheat this because if it starts to open up, you're going to have alignment issues. Last step, same as before. We're going to focus glue on that inner surface of the wing. Starting and stopping about a ½ inch. Just take this right to the table. Got an extra glue stick here. With this Aztec Pro 200, the glue is nice and hot, and you don't have to worry about rushing. Again, I'm going back against my center section. I'm going to hold this here, and then with my other hand, nice and flat, I'm going to hold it firmly against the spar. We're going to have a little bit of reflex here, so you're going to notice as long as we're pushing where the spar is, which is right here, this is going to go up. This is aerodynamic. This is going to give us reflex and keep the wingtips from dropping in the stall. So don't worry about if it faces down. Also, this is where our ailerons are. Good 45 seconds, and we're ready for our next step. So something that we did a little bit different on this model, and I think we're going to incorporate on a lot more future models, is we don't need a tremendous amount of undercamber. Typically, we leave this outer portion as undercamber, but I want this to be a legacy plane, much like our legacy airplane, where it's going to last you for years and years. It's just not going to, be flown for a season and then kind of dented and warped. We have a finish plate here that's going to go up, and it's going to be a A-fold, and it's going to friction fit right in this portion that you see here. Now, it's going to be a nice tight friction fit, so I don't want you to go all the way or else you're going to have to pry it out. We're going to open this up. We're going to put a bead of glue on the back corner here, on the inside, and then I'm going to go ahead and kind of sight this and put it here so when I fold it up, it smears the glue in and makes a nice strong glue joint. So let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, focus on the bottom here, top here. I'm just going to kind of draw an imaginary line like you see there. I'm going to fold this up, making sure that top edge of the paper goes on there, and we're going to stick it right in there. We can come back if we have a little bit of extra glue. We can always come back and we can smooth that out. Alright, I got a little bit extra glue here, not a problem. I'm just going to smooth that out with a piece of scrap foam. You can go ahead and just hold this down. This is going to give us a tremendous amount of strength, but also a beautiful finished look. Alright, our last step here is we're just going to go ahead and just trim this flush. We're just going to go ahead and remove the side of the servo hole, just line it up, making sure that we don't cut away the two tabs that are going to hold our servo in place. Our servo is going to be mounted on the top of the wing, that way if it belly lands, but also we have a nice clean linkage that's going to pull to positive. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process now on the other side. One more wing panel to go. As a recap, A-fold on the bottom. We're going to line up the spar, make sure everything looks good. 180 degrees open. Glue on the top. Line it up. Fold this over. Naturally kind of find its shape here. Use the main center section kind of as our guide to make sure everything's going to line up beautifully. Bead of glue both in the score cut and against the main spar. Always make sure that you go back to that center section to make sure that all the angles line up beautifully. Next, leading edge and the bottom of the spar. Now I'm going to hold both sections with my hands, keep it nice and flat and aligned. We'll open up the wing panel, bead of glue in the crease, and also along our top. Next step is our wingtip. We're going to focus our glue on the bottoms and the sides, and a little stripe on the inside here. And we'll just go ahead and finish up opening up that servo hole so our servo lines up nice and clean. Alright, so this is exciting. We're going to bring our three individual wing pieces together to make one big beautiful wing. Now one piece that we want to find in our kit is going to be our polyhedral gauge here, and that's what this is going to be right here. So this gauge, when we're getting our polyhedral, is going to fit right here. So to get everything lined up perfectly on the wing, we're going to go ahead and place a 2-inch piece of tape on the edge as you see here. We're then going to flip this over 180 degrees, and we're going to take our outer wing panel, and we're going to be really, really careful here to line this up before pressing it down on the tape. Make sure you put inward pressure against that center section to get as tight of a fit as possible. Once you're happy with that, go ahead and press it down. We're going to carefully flip this over. So if you don't have a nice tight joint like you see here, go ahead and start over and redo these steps until you're happy with it. We now have a nice hinge here. I can go ahead and take my razor blade and just kind of trim off that excess so it doesn't get in our way. So now that we're happy with our alignment, you can see that we have this nice hinge right here, and then it makes a beautiful, beautiful seam. I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to go ahead and trace the perimeter of all of one side. And be very careful when you're gluing this together that you don't drip hot glue on your hands. Just going to go down, over. Notice we're not rushing, we're just taking our time. Quickly open this up. I set this on the table. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just take my nice big tape dispenser here, use it as a weight, and put it right underneath there. Notice again that I'm going to the bottom surface of the wing and not the outer wingtip. With my weight on there, I'm just moving my hands along this seam, making sure that I'm happy with the fit. I'm going to hold everything in place for at least a minute to a minute and a half. Alright, my minute and a half is over here, but I'm just going to give this a little bit extra strength. I got a scrap piece of foam from my kit in my hand. I'm going to go ahead and put a thin bead of glue right down that seam. Kind of bent that squeegee a little bit. I'll press that right in there. We're going to let that dry, and then I'm going to come back with a piece of tape and put a piece of tape right over that. That is going to give us an amazing amount of strength. I worked so hard, if you guys watch some of the videos, trying to see if this wing would fold, and it simply wouldn't. Now, as we said in the opening, this plan should go along exactly with the monster version. The only difference is, unless you want a 100+ inch wing to try to transport, we're going to have a supplemental video showing you how to make a 2-piece wing. Alright, final step is to take our 2-inch packing tape, start with one end, lay it down nice and smooth. Remember, you can always lift it up if it kind of gets wrinkled on you. Right down, and wrap it around. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process now on the other wing. And we're going to pick one of the surfaces here, and we're going to put a nice heavy bead of glue tracing all of it. Make sure you have enough where the hot glue is going to meet both sides, so you have a nice strong joint. Go back to the table. We're going to open this back up again. We're going to take our polyhedral gauge, lift it up on that bottom surface, and press down. I'm going to take the center of my hands. I'm just going to make sure that I'm really happy with all the alignment here, from leading to trailing edge and the center spar. I can also use my tape dispenser or a nice heavy weight and carefully put it down nice and close to the seam here, so that way we have a little bit of help to make sure everything stays still. Once the bottom section is dry, we're just going to put a nice thin bead of glue right over that seam. I got a scrap piece that I just kind of bent. We're going to press it down right in that dihedral, and we're going to let it dry. Once our spread glue is dry, we can kind of fold this up here, and we can finish off by putting a piece of tape right on the top section. You can see that in a very short amount of time we went from 3 individual pieces to a beautiful large wing. Our next step now is to put our servos in. So for our wing servos, we're going to be using the servos from our PowerPack C Twin. Now these are FT-ES 805 servos. They're wonderful for the type of flying, and they also are very, very durable. These servos come pre-centered, so as long as you don't move them, you should be able to drop them in just as you see right here. If you have moved them or want to make sure they're centered, we also sell a servo centering tool that's included in our crafty kit that will help you with this process. We have a video linked below that will help you center your servos if you've never done that before. These servos won't reach to the center section where they need to be without the extensions. These extensions are also included in our PowerPack C Twin, And all we're going to do is take our 30 centimeter extensions and we're going to match up signal wire for signal wire. It's really important to make sure the colors of your wires match so that you have your signal and your ground and your power all aligned properly. Now we have no intention of removing these servos, so I'm going to go ahead and put a piece of tape over this connection so if they ever get pulled, they don't come disconnected inside the wing. This is a really great practice to do on any of your builds, just to make sure you don't have any in-flight failures and everything stays reliable. Make sure that you tape the right side of the servo connector. So we now have plenty of length here. We're going to go ahead and I'm just going to kind of straighten out my servo wire. I'm going to slide this down in. Sometimes we got to use gravity to help us, sometimes not. There we go. You can see if we go nice and slow and we straighten out that servo wire, I can easily pass this through without even having to use any kind of special grabbing tools. Now that I have my wire out, I'm going to go ahead and just press this down in. A little tug here, make sure we're not pinching anything. You're going to notice where I put my servo arm is going to be as close as possible to the hinge line and where the control horn is going to go. It's also pointing in the right direction, so it's a nice straight link. Now if you're building the kit, in the kit is going to be included this piece of wood you see here. If you're scratch building, you can always get these control horns from our control horn 5-pack. But we're going to go ahead and pop this out, and we'll just go ahead and get 2 of them out of the 4 for right now. Along with our control horns, we're also going to grab 2 push rods, as you see here. Go ahead and grab a pair of needle nose pliers or your Z-benders while you're at it. So with the control horn facing away from you where the holes are, I'm going to go ahead and pass this down in. I'm going to really carefully just slowly move this so it doesn't open up that hole. I can now take this, making sure that the push rod is on the inner surface. If it's on the outer surface, go ahead and reverse where your push rod goes through. And I'm going to line this up. Notice I haven't cut out my aileron, so they're all perfectly neutral right now. I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to put my thumb just ahead of the hole on the outermost circle of the control arm of the servo. Let's transfer that over. I'm going to go ahead and bend straight down. I'm going to grab it about 2 millimeters from the bend, just about the width of the servo arm. I'm going to bend it straight towards the wingtip. I can now cut this about 1/4 inch or centimeter from the edge. And you can see I have a beautiful push rod here. Now don't stress if it's too long or too short. We include plenty of push rod materials. We actually give you an extra one, and you can easily make 2 or 3 more attempts before you're out of push rod. I'm going to go ahead and lift this up, pass this down through. Notice I still haven't glued in my servo. I got 2 levels of adjustment. Go into that outermost hole and just do one last test on the fit. That looks wonderful. We got a couple millimeters each way on the servo. It's much better to adjust the servo back and forth than to move your control horn. Reason being is you want the control horn holes to be almost directly over the hinge line to give you even throw both up and down. Now that we're happy with that linkage, I can go ahead and kind of kick this out of the way. I'm going to flip over my wing 180 degrees. I'm going to take my razor blade and I'm going to carefully cut through this seam that you see right here. There we go. It's not a bad idea to take some of your push rod material and just so you don't have any kind of binding, drag it back and forth. Flatten out both those seams there so that way it doesn't rub when it moves in the future. We can now very carefully open this up to 180 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and cut a single bevel right along, making sure that I don't go past the paper on the center. Once again, we're holding our angle of our blade at a nice acute angle. And I'm keeping the blade just above the paper. Always look ahead of the blade to make sure that your thumb or anything you don't want to cut isn't going to be in the way. Now, if you push down on this and you notice any kind of resistance, it means you have too much foam between the paper and your outer surface. All you need to do is you just go back and trim it a little bit closer. If you move the control surfaces back and forth and you hear something, you can simply go through with your push rod or your razor blade and just clear the section out. You don't want any binding on your control surfaces. You should have no resistance as you see here. Our next step is to open this up. We're going to take our little dihedral gauge or a scrap piece of foam, and I'm going to go ahead and put a very thin bead of glue right over that paper as you see here. Now this isn't to glue it together. This is to give us strength. So now that I put that glue down, I'm going to come along and I'm going to wipe it right back off. I'm pushing that glue right down to the paper, into the foam. I want this to last for years for you. So doing this step is going to make sure that your control surfaces are nice and strong and they'll never delaminate. Give this a good 35 to 45 seconds and don't move it, because if you move it prematurely, you may glue your control surface down. Once it's thoroughly dry, you can go ahead and do one last test, making sure that you have no resistance on your movement. Alright, our next process is very easy. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put a bead of glue right where the control horn is. And we're going to press this down. Give that a good 35 seconds to a minute to dry. We don't want this glue joint to be weak because this is what controls our plane. Now that our control horn is done, we'll go ahead and lift this up. I'm going to go ahead and put a bead of glue on those two tabs that we told you not to cut through. And this is our last chance to make any kind of adjustments that we need to do mechanically. So notice I'm just going to kind of push that servo a little bit forward, and I'm going to line up that trailing edge perfectly. I'm going to hold that in place for about 35 seconds. If your wire is too long and you notice it's too low, you can always push the servo towards the leading edge. This is your last point of adjustment mechanically before moving on to where you have to do it through the transmitter. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the other side. Alright, just a quick recap. Tape our servo extensions together, making sure we're on the right side and our signals and our grounds all line up. We'll pass it through the spar nice and slow, possibly using gravity if we need to get that wire to where we need it. Alright, we're going to have our control horn here. And again, we're going to favor the push rod so when we install it, it lines up perfectly with the outer hole of our servo arm. Go ahead and press that in place. Alright, so we'll go ahead and line up the push rod with the outer hole of the servo arm. We're going to grab that and we're going to bend it down towards the leading edge. Pop that loose real quick. We'll grab it about 2 millimeters in, just a little bit past the thickness of the servo arm, and we're going to bend it 90 degrees to the outside. We'll go ahead and cut it about 1 centimeter or 1/4 inch away. Just take our servo arm, little rotations all we need to get it pop through. One last test fit to verify everything's good. And remember, you have plenty of extra push rod material, so if you're not happy or if it's too short or too long, go ahead and make another. Alright, pop this loose, flip it over, take our razor blade and we'll just cut out our aileron right along with that score cut. I like to come back, kind of open it up a little bit, make sure nothing makes contact. We're going to carefully crack it open. And cut a single bevel, getting as close as the paper as possible without going through. I'm going to come back here because I couldn't get to that edge. A little saw motion. We'll finish it off. Make sure when you move this you have no resistance either direction. For reinforcement, we're going to go ahead and put a thin bead of glue right on that paper. And then we're going to come back with a scrap piece of foam, press it down into the foam and the paper, making a really nice solid glue hinge joint. Make sure you don't close this for about 35 or 45 seconds so you don't accidentally glue your control surface shut. We'll apply some glue on our control horn slot and press our control horn down. Once that's dry, we can go ahead and pop this loose. 2 little drops of glue on both servo flanges here and press it into place. And remember, we can make a little bit of adjustments just by moving our servo to get everything perfectly neutral. Alright, the wings are now done. We're ready to move on to the fuselage. To get started on our fuselage, we're going to need these 4 main pieces first. Now, especially if you're building the kit here, we want to prepare these pieces and we don't want to rush this step where we're going to be gluing some seam shut, because it'll really make the final version and the final product so much better. We're going to be putting our attention and gluing all of the center seams. The center one here and here. Alright, because we want this to be nice and solid and glue flat, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit heavier bead of glue so when I'm done gluing this and I fold it flat, just a little bit of it squirts out. We're going to take it flat right down to the table. You can see we have a nice little bead of bubbles here. And we're going to smear that smooth. Oops, got a little bit on the other edge, no worries. We're going to go ahead and let that dry and do the same process on all the other pieces. Make sure that all your pieces are laying nice and flat. Give this a good 3 minutes to dry before moving on. While these are drying, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to glue the servo doubler right on the etch lines that you see here. Alright, so these 4 pieces here are now ready to be put aside. We're going to go ahead and put our attention towards the inner structure. So these 2 main sections here are going to be the main portions of the inner part of our fuselage. You can see we kind of have a battery tray here. We have also the section that the ducts are going to tab into. We want to go ahead and clear out these cavities here and here. Let's go ahead and do that now. Same process as before. Alright, so same process as before. We're going to go ahead and practice our A-fold. Here's our side plate, here's our top plate. We're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table as we rotate the bottom plate to a 90-degree angle. Once we're happy with the fit, we're going to go ahead and again focus most of our glue on the bottom of the side plate, starting and stopping about a ½ inch from each side. There we go. Right back up to a 90-degree angle. And we're going to hold that for about 35 to 45 seconds. Same process on the other side. Do our little test fold here, make sure we're happy with it. Alright. As you can see here, we have a whole bunch of different battery slots. I'm going to be flying off of a 4-cell, so this is going to be pretty much right in the center here. I'm going to go ahead and just knock out 2 of these slots. If you're working on a bigger battery, you can knock out the big ones. If you're working on a smaller, like a 2200 milliamp, it's going to be further up in the forward, and you can work on the small ones. But for this, I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to knock out these little guys here and here, and I'm going to glue the included battery straps down in place. There we go. And the easiest thing to do is just to kind of hold that there, like this. If you want to make sure that these don't ever slide out, you can always put a little drop of glue on the top of each one and press it down in place till it's dry. Alright, let's go ahead and put this piece aside. We're going to do the same process on our next rear piece. Once again, an A-fold. We're happy with that 90. Whether I build 1, 10, or 100 planes, I always try to fold it first, just to make sure everything looks right and is nice and square. Our 2 pieces of our intersection are now done. We're going to go ahead and move on, and we're going to work on the front main piece here, and we're going to build backwards, and then we're going to build forwards. So this is the main piece of our fuselage here. There's a couple things we're going to want to do, and just like where I was talking about the wings, how we didn't want to open up the cavities with a barbecue skewer, this one's actually going to be the direct opposite. To prepare our first piece of the fuselage top cover, we're going to go ahead and open this up with a barbecue skewer in a couple key areas, but I also want to point out there's a couple areas you're going to want to avoid. So on your kit, you're going to see 2 etch marks here and here. If you're scratch building with us, these are going to be noted as blue lines. We're not going to want to go ahead and open these up. As a matter of fact, we're not going to want to puncture the paper at all. These are strictly for alignment. But we do want to go ahead and drag through the seams here, 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 and here. Note that I didn't start with the sharp point. I actually went from the open area down to the closed area. This is going to be really good to keep your barbecue skewer from, getting off track. Go ahead and go through these lines about 3 or 4 times, making sure you have a nice open crush, but you don't puncture or scrape the paper on the other side. We're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit. Now there's 3 different points that we're going to want to make sure that we take time and line up perfectly. That's going to be this front corner here, this bottom edge, and this rear corner here. If you have everything lined up well, you're going to notice that the etch mark on the opposite side of the top fuselage plate lines up exactly with the interior former. Once you're happy with that, we're going to make sure we have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun, and we're going to go ahead and leave a nice bead. Don't put glue on this bottom edge right here because that's going to be cut off later. Alright, we have our glue down. We're going to go ahead and I like to just kind of line up one corner first, one corner second. Take your time before pressing it down. Got a couple seconds to work with it. There we go. Gluing this piece in right is going to assure that you have a nice square fuselage and everything's going to fit beautifully. Go ahead and hold this down for a good minute to a minute and a half, making sure it's thoroughly dry. So now comes the time where we're going to place this vertical here, and we're going to slowly, from one end to the other, start working this over so everything fits nice and flat against the ground. Now if you do this right, you should notice that this edge here will line up perfectly, just as you see here. So just like before, we're going to make sure that these 3 edges are perfectly aligned, nice and flush. That's going to give us a nice true square fuselage. Alright. Now we have a seam that we're going to want to preserve, and that seam is going to be this one right here. We're not going to put any glue in this seam until we're actually gluing the fuselage skin together. So our next seams are going to be here, here, and here. Once again, we're not putting glue here. Alright, so we have plenty of glue on our glue stick. Nice bead on all 3. Fold this over and around, basically making a big door. Nice thing about this is we can actually move this, we don't have to leave it on the table, and we can hold it in place until it's thoroughly dry, at least 35 to 45 seconds. Alright, so just like our wing, you can see that this now has nice form to it. Our next step here is we're going to go ahead and apply a bead of glue, and again we're going to go back just like we did on the one side, and then put our glue down all along the surface here. Once again, we're making sure not to put any glue on the bottom section that you see here. I'm going to go ahead and put the glue first starting here. Fold it over, exact same process. One thing I like to do is kind of use the table, find that flush edge right here, and squeeze it down, and then lightly pick it up, confirm everything is nice and aligned, and then hold it down. You can see that even though we have a fuselage, it may look complicated. If you take it step by step and you watch for alignment on every step, it's going to be an awesome experience. Let's go ahead and put our next section on, which is going to be right here. So this is going to be our next section that's going to mount right here. Before we do that, we want to remove the foam from the outer edges. So just like with our cavity, we're going to go ahead and score down on each side, and we're going to peel this away, leaving the paper. There we go. Once again, avoiding this very first line, we're going to go ahead and put a crease here, here, not in the center, here, and here. Don't feel like you need to try to crush this or open this up in one stroke. You can do it in 3 or 4 passes. There we go. So for our next section here, we're going to go ahead and match this up on the side here. To match the wrap and just give a good test fit, we're going to keep an eye on this reference point. It should go just above this piece you see here. And what we should see is when we wrap this around, everything lines up nice, just like you see here. Just as before, we're going to go ahead and leave this seam alone. But what we do want to do is we want to put glue here, here, and here. And then we're going to repeat that motion and hold it right in place so everything is nice and aligned. There's one, there's two, and there's three. Right back down, hold it up. All we're concentrating on is making sure that everything is nice and aligned. You can see that nice seam in the center, great indication of the fact that we're square. Hold this down for about 35 to 45 seconds, making sure everything is thoroughly dry. So the first surface that we're going to concentrate on is going to be this one right here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to line this up just as we did before. And what I'd like you to do is put a piece of tape, once you're happy with where everything is, put a piece of tape right on this top surface. Now if you're building slow and everything's going good, these two seams should line up exactly. Line this up right where we think it should be and press it here. This is going to kind of keep everything from shifting one direction to the other because we want to really make this a nice tight seam. Now what we can do is we can lay this on its side and we can glue this down where it's nice and tight. So if we're happy with that, we're going to open it up. We're going to place glue down on the flat side, on the inside, and then also right along this edge right here. Now we can rotate it in and get a nice tight seam. I like to kind of reach underneath there and kind of pinch it a little bit. Alright, our one side is done. We now have this anchored and everything should key in beautifully, just like that. So what we want to do is we want to carefully go ahead and remove this. Our friend John Overstreet came up with a great technique that you don't want to ever pull against the seam. Go one way or the other. In this case, I'll just go across. So just like before, we're going to make sure that we're really happy with the alignment. Take your good time on this because it's really going to make the plane look amazing. Everything lines up. I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just lift up slightly here. And I'm going to expose these top edges that you see right here. Here, here, and here. Along with that, I can put some glue down in this section here. Don't worry about putting tons of glue because it's going to be plenty strong. So I'm first going to focus the glue right on this edge. I'm just going to give a couple swipes back and forth. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place a nice bead of glue right along here. Back down flat against the table. Just kind of seam one side over the other, and I'm going to press down and hold. Get rid of that extra glue there. Give this about 30-40 seconds to dry, and we're ready for the next step. So our next step here is to go ahead and address where the battery hatch is going to be. This is going to be the extra paper that you have right here, and it's going to just be to give this a nice finish edge. We want to get this as nice and square as possible so it blends in beautifully with the rest of the fuselage. To do this, all I'm going to simply do is I'm going to put a nice bead of glue starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. And one at a time I'm going to roll this down just like I'm closing the door. We'll hold that down for about 30-40 seconds, and then we're going to trim off the rest of the paper instead of folding it around the rest of the way. That way the battery hatch isn't too tight. Let's do the same process on the other side now. Go into a medium. Notice I'm focusing right where that paper meets the foam to the table. Nice and square. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take my razor blade. Just going to trim this back nice and flush. Alright, our second section of our fuselage is now done. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards the rear now. So for the rear of our fuselage, this is going to be our two main sections here. Just like before, we have an inner structure that's going to line up with these, and then we have an outer skin. Now one thing that's different from the front skin is this time where the top index line is, it's actually going to be something that we're going to crush down. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we took our time when we crushed this down. One thing in this back area, it doesn't hurt to kind of crush it down just a little bit more than it needs because it's a pretty sharp angle between these bends here, and that's going to be where your stabilizer goes. We don't want this to fight too much as we bend this over and go 90 to 90. So go ahead and put a little extra couple creases on the back edge there. Just like before, we have these index lines. We're going to take our time and make sure that we line up everything as perfectly as possible. Once again with the front, the bottom, and the back side lining up against the index line. Once we're happy with that, we're going to go ahead and put our glue down. Just going to look at the 3 corners I really need to pay attention to, and let everything else fall into place. Alright, with our bottom edge done, we're going to take it down to the table just like we've done before, making sure that when we wrap it around and push it firmly against the table, we have a nice equal spacing here. That looks wonderful. It's always good to practice these a couple different times to make sure you look at every single angle and that you're happy with it. Once everything looks good, you can go ahead, and again we're going to avoid this seam right here. We're going to place our glue down. Just going to notice I'm hopping over where those slots are just to make my life a little bit easier in a couple steps to come. Avoiding glue right where those slots are. Back down to the table. And this one we definitely want to keep it on the table and make sure everything from the leading edge to the trailing edge is 90 degrees and facing just how you see here. See, I got a little overzealous with my glue here, but that's okay. We were able to get it loose. Our next step here is put our bead of glue down and on the main section here. We're going to repeat that motion one more time. Back down to the table, making sure that this leading edge here and the bottom surface all line up, and that everything on both sides is perpendicular to the table all the way back. So our next step is to test fit this into the fuselage. Now don't be alarmed if you got to do a little trimming here and move this back where they may butt up against each other because of either glue globs or maybe the doublers are there. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit. There we go. And you're going to notice here that the back is not flat. The back actually tapers up. So what we don't want to do is try to glue it like this. This is going to go ahead and we're going to line it up with the seams. And we're going to glue it down. So what I'm doing here is I'm just test fitting. This needs to go up just a touch, maybe a millimeter. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim a millimeter off. You may not have to do any adjustments. But take your time on this step just to make sure you get the best fit possible. Oh, that looks wonderful. There we go. Now that we have everything fitted the way we like, we're going to need to glue these two pieces together in one swoop. So to do that easily, I'm going to go ahead and keep my tape close to me. I'm going to go ahead and put glue where I need it, which is going to be around this outer edge and on these tabs here. And then once I fit it into place, I'm going to take tape and I'm going to tape different portions on just to make sure everything stays aligned. Now one thing you want to make sure is that you don't try to twist the fuselage or lift it up or down too much. Make sure you have a nice tight butt seam right up against the back and you'll be good to go. A little bit there, a little bit there. Okay, so the first thing I want to address is the top. Line up those two seams nice and tight. There we go. Just go ahead and flip it on its side here. There's one. Flip it over to the other side. Not the prettiest tape job, but don't worry, we'll be pulling that off in a second. There we go. So while this is drying, what I want to look for is I want to make sure when this is sitting flat that the space here and here are the same. Now you don't need to measure this, you can just eyeball it, but everything looks really, really good. So after a few minutes here, we can go ahead and remove our tape carefully. Keep in mind if a little bit of glue is touching it, it may want to really stay there. If you're scratch building and using Adam's Ready board or any kind of other foam boards, make sure that the tape release is easy from it. And if it doesn't, just go ahead and leave it on. Alright, so our fuselage is really starting to take shape here. Next we're going to put our attention towards the bottom of it, the bottom rear to be exact. For that we're going to go ahead and weed out this piece that you see here. You're going to notice that there's a double thickness here, and then there's a single thickness of foam here. So take a moment here to make sure that your piece looks just like this. Our next step is to go ahead and give this a test fit. Now we can use the table as our fit here, and we can press this down in. And what we're looking to do is to start the seam right here at the very end. Don't worry about doing anything with this at the moment. We'll go ahead and address that after the horizontal stabilizer's in. But with this firmly pressed down all the way through, we can flip it over and we can make sure that we're happy with everything that we see. If we're happy with everything that we see, we can go ahead and pop this off. So I got plenty of glue in my glue gun here. I'm going to go ahead and focus the glue majorly on the foam portion. So I'm going to go right along here, get it up against the foam. I really want some good strength in this rear section. Go ahead and get this portion here. Now I'm going to follow up with the main fuselage. I'm going to place a bead of glue right on the top section here. Alright, now we're going to repeat the exact same step we did before. Take this right over. Again, the back seam is our alignment point. I'll lock that in there. Cables our front all the way down. There we go. And now what I'm going to really concentrate is that I'm not only pushing down, but I'm also pushing in. Keep your pressure nice and flat. Don't dent your foam. There's no need to do that. And this is really going to make the whole airplane so much stronger and also keep it square. And once again, if your tabletop isn't non-slip with the waterproofing spray, go ahead and move it every 15 seconds just to make sure you don't glue it to your table. Alright, our 30 to 40 seconds is over. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Oh, that looks beautiful. You can see using the table gives us a nice clean edge, nothing squeezed out. We're ready for our next step. So right now we're going to avoid the section right underneath the wing because that's going to be a different process when we mount the wing. The next piece I want you to look for and locate is a piece that looks just like this. Now just like in the back part of the fuselage, we're going to go ahead and weed out the outer perimeter, and some of these are going to be folded up. So you can see that this is a rectangle. The short sides of the rectangle are going to be glued and folded over. The outer portions of the rectangle are going to be glued into the fuselage. So let's go ahead and do this portion now where we fold over this side and this side. Go ahead and focus all of our glue there, stopping and starting just on the edge. We're going to go 90 degrees, count to 15. This one we can go ahead and fold over the rest of the way. Same process on the other side. .90 degrees, down the rest of the way. Alright, with our two pieces folded over, the portion where we're going to want to put this is we're going to want to start this section right where the paper ends and the raw foam begins. Let's go ahead and do a test fit. Alright, that looks really good. So same process as before. We're going to focus the glue down right against where the foam is. We want this to be really strong because this is actually going to hold our wings on, or at least keep them indexed. So we got that. And this is going to take a little bit of guesstimating. I'll just kind of hold this up here so I know roughly where to start. There's one side. Plenty of glue there. Okay, let's slide this in. So don't bother burning your fingers. We're going to let the table do the work for us. So our bottom sections are done. We're going to put this to the side and start preparing our front nose section now to go onto our fuselage. So for our front nose piece, it kind of looks a little bit like a samurai warrior. We're going to go ahead and prepare this by going ahead and removing the outer sections here. And we can do that with our razor blade. Another thing we want to do is, since we glued this seam here, we want to take our razor blade and carefully make sure that we've broken these apart, because they're going to be able to need to be moved independently from each other. There we go. Let's go ahead and remove these pieces. So starting from this here, we're going to go ahead and crush down, but we're going to stop right about here. We want to try to get this as tight of a seam as possible. So we're going to go ahead and fold here and here. And the rest of these, we can go all the way through. Take about 2 passes over each one. Always work from the wide end of the point down to the point. Take your time when you get to the small pieces. Don't rush this part. In this last section, we're going to be doing a bevel on, but we'll wait till we're mostly done on the nose here. So for our first section here, we're going to slowly fold this around, and we're going to meet it up in the middle. Now, it's always a good idea just to do a quick test fit, because everything is going to index off of this piece. Alright, so our test fit looks really good here. What we're going to do is we're going to focus glue on only these 2 seams right here and right here. We're going to go back to our main fuselage, we're going to form this, and we're going to hold it until it's thoroughly dry. Alright, now I'm starting and stopping a good 5/8 of an inch from both sides. I don't want the glue to squirt out and glue the seams that we're going to be folding down on each other together. So I'll flip this over. I'm simply just going to float this in the air, line up my index marks. I'm going to hold this until it's nice and dry. Alright, once that glue is thoroughly set, notice I'm kind of hanging this off the edge of the table here. I'm going to go ahead and take a piece of tape, place it here. I'm going to go ahead and line up the index nice and close. There we go. Now we have the freedom to work with this on each side, getting it nice and tight and perfectly aligned. Alright, so our next step here is we're going to focus glue on the 3 seams right around here. Once again, I'm going to start and stop, giving myself plenty of room for that glue to squish without pouring over to the other side. Take this down. Gotta kind of lift up and align at the same time. So once we're happy with it, give it a good minute to a minute and a half to dry. Once that's dry, we can open this up like a door, and now we can focus our energy and get a nice tight seam here. So we're going to place our glue here, here, and here. Once again, we're going to give this a good minute and a minute and a half to dry. We're going to do the same exact process on the other side. Open it up. Right down. And hold it until it's dry. So this is a really exciting part. We get to line these up. What we are hoping for is a perfect seam on both sides. That means you perfectly lay this down all the way through and everything's meeting up nice and square. If it is off a little bit, don't lose any sleep over it, because it's going to be on the bottom and no one will see. Just go ahead and shift it the best you can, glue it where it is, and trim. Alright, that looks really good. So what we're going to do here, make sure we have plenty of glue. We're going to glue this seam down. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 right there. Get a little heavy on that one so that paper squeezes out. I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to hold it in place just for a couple seconds here. I'll switch to the table. Hold this open so you can see. We'll hold the two halves together just like that. So with our main section on, I'm going to go ahead and flip this one section open here, the remainder area we have. I'm going to go ahead and place glue on the seam that you see down to here and on these two joints here. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to take it to the table. I'm going to flip it open and I'm going to concentrate on just one half at a time, lining it up and pressing it in just like you see here. Got my glue seam. 1 and 2. Flip it over, down, and press it in. We're going to let this dry for about a minute. That's one section down. We're going to do the same process on the other side. Seam here, glue here. Alright, so now we're working on the bottom. We're going to place our glue on these bottom two seams and then the first half of the bottom plate. Always make sure that you test fit each one of these and that you're happy with the fit before you ever put any glue down. Make sure our spacing's right there. Alright, one last section here. This one we're going to put a little bit of glue right here. Flip it down and over. Notice I'm using the table as my friend here. I'm centering this up and I'm pressing down. As we do more and more sections, we're going to have to press down more and more and rock it up and raise that tail up to get it nice and flat against the table. There we are. Alright, so the next two sections are going to be exactly the same way here. Let's go ahead and do them. Test fit here, making sure we're happy with it. Looks great. Bead here, bead. As we're getting closer and closer to the end, I'm putting more and more attention just to make sure everything is symmetrical and nice. So now that we're at our last piece here, I'm going to go ahead and cut a double bevel in this piece that you see right here. This is going to just be our little nose cap. It's going to fold over. We want it to be foam, but we don't want it to be too hard to bend. So I'm just going to kind of chew out a little bit and create a little bit of bevel. Same process as before. We're just going to go section by section. So same process as before with the nose section here. We're going to go ahead and do the two seams. Glue on here. It's just getting a little bit tinier every time, but that's okay. Drop, drop. Focusing on one small section at a time, making sure it's square and true. Alright, our last section is going to be our two seams and then glue up in the middle. We'll glue this down, and then we'll glue the following one down. So we're going to need to bevel all 4 corners of this front little tab here. I got the top and the bottom done, but I also need to kind of, with a sine motion, cut in on both sides. This doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to use the table to kind of help us get the final form done here. Smush it in a little bit more. There we go. That's looking promising. All right. We'll focus our glue just around the inside here. There we go. Carefully flip this closed, don't burn your fingers. I'm going to take this right to the table and hold it in position for about 45 seconds to a minute. At this point, your nose is done. We're ready to move on to the next step. With our fuselage assembly complete, we're now going to put our attention towards the bottom hatch. Now this hatch has a lot of the same themes. We're going to go ahead and clear out the cavities. On these sides, we also have a fold over, a C-fold. So these cavities are double thick. We're also going to clear these 2 sides out as well. Let's go ahead and do that now. All we've been doing so far is A-folds. This is what we affectionately call a C-fold because basically it looks like a C. All it is we just fold it over completely with the paper giving us a nice finished edge. To do a C-fold, we fold it around for a test fit. Then we're just going to apply a very thin bead of glue on the paper and then also on the foam. Fold it around. Make sure you don't touch where that paper is because the heat's going to transfer over extra easy. I like to hold this down for about 10 seconds and then take it vertical to the table and then shift it down against the table to get a nice square edge. We'll sit there and we'll let that dry for about 35 seconds. Let's do the exact same process now on the other side. Quick test fold. This is even more important if you're scratch building and cutting on the plans because everything may be slightly different. This one I can't take to the table because we have some extensions here. No big deal at all. Alright, same process now for our A-fold. Here's our side plate, here is our bottom plate. We're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table as we rotate up 90 degrees. You're also going to notice that those C-folds give us a nice finish edge to kind of push against. Happy with the fit? I'll take my glue down, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge and focusing most of my glue on the very bottom of the side plate. Now onto the other. With a lot of these larger builds, you're going to notice that we have a lot more finished edges, we have a lot more foldovers, a lot more things to give it strength and longevity. We really want these planes to last years, even though they're made out of common, simple materials. Alright, so take a moment, make sure that your hatch looks just like what you see here. So our hatch is now done. We're going to go ahead and put a little tiny pull tab on this because when this goes up against the fuselage, it's going to be nice and flush and we don't want to have to dig into the foam to pull it out. I'm going to go ahead and use my 2-inch tape, pull about 3 inches, and put it on. I'm just going to go ahead and take the last inch and I'm going to fold it over. Give myself a nice little pull tab that won't be sticky. I can now go ahead and tape this down so when I put it in, I can pull this hatch out easily. Let's go ahead and give this a test fit. So before we test fit our hatch, we're going to go ahead and make sure where the hatch is going to go that there's no glue globs or obstructions. Because we put this nose on, it's quite possible that some glue seeped out and caused something like what you see right here. We're just going to go ahead and just pop that or cut that out. Alright, so for our test fit, we're just going to go ahead and slide this in. It should be a nice friction fit. All the way forward, all the way down. If anything's obstructing or making this look funny, you can go ahead and trim it and adjust it until it looks just perfect. While we're at it, we're not going to rely on friction alone. You're going to see 2 little holes here. So we're going to go ahead and poke down about 1 inch on each side. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and cut our barbecue skewer about 1.5 inches. We're going to cut 2 pieces. Rather than trying to drive this all the way through from one side to the other, we're going to use these basically as pins. To make this pin nice and neat, We can even put a little tiny glue glob on the end that gives us a little rubbery stop. Alright, so now we have our little holes. All we need to do is we just tab those in, one on each side, and our hatch is nice and secure. Alright, our hatch is now done. We're ready to put our attention towards the rear ducts. So in our kit is included this large plywood piece. You notice we've been taking different pieces out as we've been building the plane. This time we're going to go ahead and remove these outer sections, and you're going to notice one is slightly different than the other. Make sure you save the pieces that we have here and put them to the side, because there's going to be pieces we're going to use later on in the build. So when we break these out, you're going to notice a couple little tabs here. Go ahead and cut those flush with the razor blade. Alright, so for our top ducts, we have these following pieces here. We have the rear exhaust, we have our main sections, and then we have our front noses of the nacelles, and then we have these two wood pieces. Now if I take these two wood pieces and put them over top of each other, you're going to notice that there's two different sizes. The one that is smaller is going to go to the rear. So let's go ahead and prepare these first here and get these ready. There's nothing we really need to do with these two other than to strip some paper off of each side, so we can do that in a moment. But these two sides, we want to go ahead and we want to remove the paper cavities on both sides here. You're going to notice it's slightly thinner than the foam, and that's not because of folds, it's just because it's a relief. And then we're also going to want to go ahead and carefully open up these two chamfers so the plywood can roll inside. Once we have these two cavities opened up, we're going to go ahead and remove the paper. Let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go ahead, and I'm just going to take this down at a very docile angle here, and I'm going to go ahead and drag it through. I'm not going to try to do this in one sweep. I'm going to take 4 or 5, really slow. Once I feel the tension of this on the stick from the other side of the piece of paper, I'm going to stop and do the other one. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and carefully remove the paper. Go and put these two pieces aside, and let's go ahead and remove the paper now on our other two sections. Find out where the sections meet up exactly, flip them 180, and then remove the paper off of each one. Alright, so we have all of our pieces prepped. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put our formers into the fuselage, and then we can start molding our main portion of our ducts. Now before we can slide our ducts in place, what we need to do is we need to connect these two lines. We purposely left this out of the kit because we wanted to make sure people could fold this together and then connect the two lines. That way this part stays nice and true. To do this, it's very easy. We can take a straight edge or some kind of straight piece, and all we do is connect the two lines together. I always try to not to do it just in one complete swipe. Just a couple simple passes. The other one I can pretty much just freehand. A little saw motion will do it. Same process on the back. Alright, now that we have our slots done, we're going to go ahead and, just like we talked about before, we're going to take the smaller of the two formers and we're going to place that one in the back. Don't try to just push this down and crease it. Rock it in the rocking motion, let it find its tabs, and pop in. there's the second set. Don't worry if this is just raised ever so slightly above, that's just fine. Now if you sight down, you should see that both ducts are nice and parallel to each other, so when we wrap this, they're not going to be crooked. We're not going to glue these pieces down at the moment. We're going to go ahead and wrap the ducts while they're on the fuselage, and when we're done with that, we can remove it and we can finish the process without hurting or damaging or moving the fuselage. Let's go ahead and grab our two main rectangles here, and we're going to put one to the side, and the other one we're going to start forming in a round circle. Now these circles, or these pieces, are actually a little bit bigger than they need because we kind of want them to overlap. But because everyone's going to be slightly different, we left you a little bit of room to trim and to cut, and we're going to hide that seam right on the back side of the fuselage so no one can see it. First thing we want to do is take this to the edge of the table, and we're going to feed with this hand off the table as we pull down with the other hand, letting the corner do the work for causing our curve. Let's go ahead and do that. Notice I'm kind of feeding this through. Just switch over and just let my hand kind of do the work. Feeding this over. One's pulling down, one's pushing and pushing forward. As we get closer and closer, you're going to notice it's naturally taking a beautiful shape and there's no crinkles in it at all. It's nice and smooth. We're going to do a couple more times so we don't really have to fight this edge that you see here. One thing I like to do is just kind of roll it up like a newspaper. Let it kind of get a memory. One more time. Just kind of getting tighter and tighter, but we're not wrinkling it. There we go. And this is right what we want to see here. Really, it's not fighting at all. It's a nice round circle, and we're ready to go on to the next step. You're going to notice I can show you on this flat piece a little bit easier that these lines are not equal in the middle. We have a short section, a big section, and then kind of a medium section. We're going to want to focus on the smallest portion here, and we're going to want that to face forward towards the nose of our plane. So in this case, here's our shortest section here. This is going to be forward. Our next couple steps, we're really going to want to take our time. So take a deep breath, relax a little bit, make sure that you're not anxious about this because we're going to walk through it step by step. And if you follow these steps, it's going to turn out perfect.
Okay.
Alright, our first step we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and cut roughly about 1/2 inch. Doesn't really matter how much, we're just going to kind of go right in the middle that you see right here on both sides. Just match up your cuts. Now with the short end pointing towards the nose, we're going to go under our ductwork, and we're going to kind of bring this up halfway on both sides. There we go. Now what I'd like you to do is make sure both ends are down, and we're going to go ahead and just tack this in with a little drop of glue on both sides of each former. One there, one there, there, and one there. Now this takes the most discipline. We gotta wait about 3 minutes and let this thoroughly dry. We want this firmly anchored, everything nice and square, because this is gonna be our index to wrap the whole piece. So notice one thing here, basically that this edge is all the way pressed in, but we're not really worried about the rest of it. We're going to be taking care of that as it moves along. What I really want you to concentrate on is that this is all the way pushed in, and this wood is against the paper on the other side, and it's at the angle, so when this comes around and meets it, it's not going to be at a sharp angle like this. It's going to be ready to meet it butt like this. Alright, just one side at a time. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to wiggle these around. I'm not really pressing hard, I'm just kind of wiggling the wood back and forth, letting it find that seat and that cavity that we opened up. You're going to notice as I come around to the other end here that we now have to go ahead and do 2 more relief cuts to let this fall over the other side. Let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, we have our pieces pretty much where we want them, and what I kind of want to point out here is you're going to notice that we have just a little bit of overhang. That's good because that's going to give us the exact angle we want. What I want you to do while holding down with one hand, so we're going to go ahead and take our razor blade, and we're just going to go ahead and do a light cut. Make sure you don't cut through and cut your fingers. On the front side, hopefully without moving it. On the back side. Now we can open this up carefully. I'm going to come in, I'm just going to remove the section of foam that we need right down to the paper. Don't worry too much. If these are off a couple millimeters from the front to the back, it's not going to be the end of the world, no one's going to see it. There we go. Alright, same process as before. Should be even a little bit easier the second time around. Right back. This is where our tape comes in. We're going to take 3 pieces of tape, kind of giving ourselves the ability to stitch this together. So we're going to place it on the 3 angles that we can kind of pull the tape through and cinch down the ducts. We'll go from the back to the front, make sure everything is nice and tight against there. One section, first section, second, and third. Now, we haven't set anything in stone yet. If there's anything you're not happy with, if you need to cut a little bit more, go ahead and do so now and make it just the way you like it. Alright, so I got a little scrap piece of foam here because I'm definitely going to need it in a moment. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I also have plenty of hot glue. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a bead of glue and I'm going to trace the perimeter. Now keep in mind, because the paper's off, this foam is going to melt extra easy. So just concentrate on getting a thin bead of glue around the full perimeter, and once you're done, you can go ahead and squeegee it out and make it nice and smooth. Don't dig your tip down into the foam. I'm not really stressing about getting exactly where I want it because my squeegee is going to do the rest. There we go. And while I'm at it, I'm going to put a nice healthy bead. Just pretend that this is no longer a squeegee and it's a paintbrush. Put a nice healthy bead of glue here. I'm going to take this right on the edge and push it into the steam, just like we're spackling shut a crack. When using your scrap piece of foam to spackle the outer edge of seams, make sure you also get the middle seam. I'm going to do the exact same process now on the front side. Now it's really important with every one of these steps that you make sure that your ducts haven't shifted or twisted in any way. The easiest way to do that is to make sure they're firmly down the fuselage against that inner structure on the rear of our fuselage. So we're going to give this a good 3 minutes plus to dry, and then we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. So first step is we round off our main rectangular duct piece on the table, and we roll it up like a newspaper to let it get a memory. Second, we're going to identify the leading edge, and that's going to be the shortest rectangle, which is going to be right here. And we're going to cut 2 half-inch notches right where we made our reliefs. Making sure our ducts are firmly in place on the fuselage and nice and square. We're going to go ahead and roll this up. And we're going to pull our foam into the former about a half-inch up where we made our relief cuts. Making sure that our foam is all the way against the former and that the former is touching the back side of the paper on our leading edges. We're going to go ahead and place 4 drops of glue on the former and let it dry thoroughly before moving on. Next, we're going to go ahead and work from where we glued, pressing the formers down into the foam as we wrap it around all the way to the end. Once we get to the far side, we're going to go ahead and cut more relief cuts on both sides of the formers so that the 2 pieces can meet. Once this is thoroughly wrapped around, we're going to use our razor blade, and we're going to put a score line right along where the foam meets, and this is going to be the portion that we remove right down to the paper. We're going to apply 3 pieces of tape here that will help us keep the ducts closed while the glue dries. Same process as before. We're just going to go ahead and push it right back in. The second time should be even easier now. Just because we have it taped shut doesn't mean we have to commit, so just make sure you're happy with the way everything looks. Once our ducts are closed up and taped and we're happy with the way everything looks, we're going to go ahead and put a bead of glue right around the inside and smear it in with a piece of foam. The easiest way to get the glue in is to let gravity help you and to hold the ducts vertical on the fuselage and let your glue seep in. Both of our ducts are now glued in place. Make sure this dries for a good 3 to 4 minutes. Everything is nice and solid before removing your ducts. At this point, we're going to go ahead and put the front and the back portions of our ducts on. The easiest way to remove the ducts is to go ahead and lift up with both fingers, just like that. Both the front portions of the air ducts and the back portions, this process is the same, but we're going to go ahead and start with the smaller piece first. First thing we want to do is, just like before, we want to establish our curve. Notice that as I'm pulling this through, I'm keeping this at a nice 90-degree angle. So I'm curving it as it goes around. It doesn't take much before you have the curve nice and neat. Maybe one more swipe. Just like that. I also like to roll this up kind of like a newspaper. Kind of roll it back and forth. Let it find its shape. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make absolutely sure that we have our ducts and we're working on the front portion. Again, the front portion is going to be shorter than the rear portion. We're going to go ahead and take the top portion of the duct and we're going to slide it over and let it become a smaller diameter than what you see here. Starting right at our original seam, we're going to go ahead and slowly unroll this, pushing up against the paper, until we come to the point where we have our overlap. Okay, making sure it's as tight as possible. We can take our razor blade and we can mark just like we did on the original ducts right where we need to cut. Simply crack this loose and remove that paper, and we should have the perfect size that we need to be able to fit our ducts. Same process as before. This time I'm just going to go ahead and match it perfectly. And I'm going to wrap it around the other way. Give it one last test fit. If you cut this right, it should be such a nice friction fit, it doesn't even come loose. Alright, we've gone through this motion 2 times, now it's time to make it permanent. I want to only do this 1/4 at a time, so I'm going to focus my glue between the paper and the foam, and I'm going to go down 90 degrees. When wrapping the ducts for the last time with the glue on it, make sure you start from the one with the piece with the paper tab and wrap towards the top and around to the bottom. I accidentally started the wrong way and it's a little bit more difficult. Once that's dried for about a minute, we'll do another 90 degrees. Don't feel like you have to have every square inch of this done. We can stop just short if you have to of the other glue joint. The important thing is as you roll this forward, you're getting a nice tight seam up against it. Always take a scrap piece of foam, wipe off any excess. I'm putting a little bit of tension pushing forward on this just to keep it tight up against the paper where it's glued. Alright, once this is thoroughly dry, we can carefully remove our tape. I'm going to go ahead and finish off this edge with just a clear piece of tape to give us a nice, clean, tight seam. Alright, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. Flip it over and repeat those steps. Alright, so a quick recap. We're going to curl our foam piece. We're going to obviously make sure that we're working on the front end. We're going to start it right where the original seam is. We're going to slowly expand it up against the edge, right against that paper, all the way around. We can take our razor blade and we can mark just like we did on the original ducts, right where we need to cut. Simply crack this loose and remove that paper, and we should have the perfect size that we need to be able to fit our ducts. When wrapping the front of the ducts with glue on it, make sure you start and wrap from the top going around to the bottom. The top surface of this will be the one with the paper tab. The rear of the ducts are no different than the front. We're going to go ahead and start with curling our pieces, and we're going to follow the exact same process we've done 2 times already. One thing I just wanted to point out here before we go on to the next step here is you're going to notice that you have 4 little mounting holes. A lot of people in the community have been asking for an EDF solution or a multi-rotor solution, and we've talked about that. These mounting holes are going to be for a future kit, so when we have the right EDF solution or the right prop inside the duct solution, we can actually make that supplemental kit, get the free plans, and get the kit to you. Last step there is we're going to go ahead and do one final test fit. Everything should line up just beautifully. And it does. Alright, we are now done with this portion of the build. We're going to go ahead and move on to the elevator. For our tail section, we're first going to start on our horizontal tail. And we're going to go ahead and first do a double bevel on the section you see here, and then a single bevel on the rear portion here. Same process as before, keeping our blade at a nice tight angle and dragging it through. There we go. Single bevel, easy way to crack that. Go up like this. And I'm going to place my single bevel on this portion here. Alright, let's go ahead and do a reinforcement hinge the same way we did on our ailerons on our wings. We're going to press the tip of the nozzle right down over the paper. And then we'll come back with a scrap piece of foam and scrape it off. I usually like to make 2 passes. Give this about 45 seconds to dry and make sure you don't close the control surfaces so they don't accidentally glue together. Next, with our tail section flat on the table with the bevel facing up towards us, we're slowly going to rotate this over 180 degrees. Don't try to do this in one motion, but just simply rock it back and forth nice and gentle until it fully goes over. If you have to, you can either crush down or cut a bigger double bevel in there just to make sure you're not really stressing out the tail by folding it over. There we go. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and place some glue right on this edge here. This time I'm just going to go ahead and fold this end over just like you see here. Just makes it a little bit easier to get even pressure on the whole bottom flap by pushing down on the bigger piece. Just make sure you're pushing with the flats of your hands so you're not denting your foam. Make sure you hold this for a good 1.5 to 2 minutes because there's going to be a lot of tension on this piece. To give the elevators a lot of stability, especially when we're flying fast, we don't want this to go ahead and wiggle. Also, putting a piece of wood here is going to be incredibly difficult here late in later steps. So we're going to go ahead and just simply use a barbecue skewer to brace between both sides. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and drag just with a couple swipes. This should be nothing new to us here. And then I'm going to cut my piece to length. Just like that. one kick test fit just to make sure we're happy with it. That looks good. I'm going to gently roll that out. And I'm going to follow up with glue, making sure I stop about a ½ inch from the edge. We'll go ahead and kind of press this down in place, all the way to the bottom. I can even use a scrap piece of foam to make sure that everything is nice and flush. Once that's dried, we can go over with one last piece here just to give that extra little bit of strength. Take your scrap foam and press it in. Alright, our tail section is now done. Let's go ahead and work on mounting it to our fuselage. Now you're going to notice on the rear of the fuselage here that it looks like only part of the elevator is cut out for the elevator slot. On the inside of the fuselage we do have some score cuts that are going to guide your razor. The reason we left this as score cuts is because we wanted to make sure this folded together nicely and that this part here didn't kind of release and stay independent. So what we're going to do first, so you're going to notice the score cuts on the inside of the fuselage. All I'm going to do is place my razor blade on the inside, and then kind of with a saw motion, I'm going to let that guide right through the score cut. Do the same process on the other side. There we go. We're going to do this on both sides of the fuselage. Okay. Next we're going to put the rear cone on our fuselage. Now this piece looks a little bit funny, but what we're going to want to do is cut a double bevel here, 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 and here. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Take a moment to make sure that all your bevel cuts look just like this. Cool. And the last step that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove this piece right here. So now that we have our double bevels cut in the areas here, we're not done beveling, but what we do want to start doing is fitting. This is going to be somewhat custom fit to the back end of your fuselage here based on how you built it and how everything lines up. But what we want to do, just like our nose, is we want to go section by section and form it. And then at the end of the section, we should have a beautifully tied in piece. This is kind of like a compound fold, which is pretty cool. So you can see naturally that this piece is going to line up where you see here. We're going to go ahead and go side by side, and we are going to first put some glue here and here, and we're going to line up this piece like so. Don't worry about the fact that this isn't cutting, because we're actually going to cut a relief so the paper overlaps and makes a nice tight seam. So let's go ahead and first establish the angles that we want and get that going. Once again, we're not trying to go for a tight butt joint. We're just going to go ahead and line this up on the angles. Alright, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side now. Now that we have our main form taken care of, we're going to go ahead and put a couple more drops of glue on these two seams here and here. What we're kind of doing is we're getting a pretty complicated shape by folding it together, but it's going to kind of have a couple angles that just can't be repeated very easily with foam. Give this about 35 to 40 seconds to dry. Our next step here is we're going to go ahead and trim. Now every model is going to be a little bit loose in different areas depending on how it's built, but what we're looking to do here is we're looking to close these gaps. Easiest way for me is I'm actually going to go ahead and take this distance that we see here, and I'm going to transfer it up to this top section so this whole piece rotates in. Go ahead and just trim and sand this until you have a nice tight fit all the way around. Easy way to tell that you're on the right path is if you hold this and everything's flat, most likely when we take it up to this, it's going to fit beautifully. So at this point we have a nice fit. We're going to go ahead and put this aside, and now we're going to install our stabilizer. To do that, we're going to go ahead and make sure that the bevel cut is facing down. We're going to roughly line up the middle. Here we go. We're just going to slide it in until it clicks. Now we can slide it back and forth just a little bit. What we're going to look for here is we're going to want to match up this tail, so when we kind of take the geometry of the fuselage, it's equal on both sides. A little bit over there. There we go. Now would be a really great point to make sure that your tail is parallel to the table and that everything is nice and square. So you can do this as simply as just going ahead and kind of marking where your finger meets the top surface on both sides. If it is crooked in any way, don't worry about that. You can easily shave one side or the other, but get this portion perfectly square to the bottom because that's what the wings are going to line up with. Once you're happy with that, we can put a bead on all four sides and lock it in. We're going to let this dry for a good minute to a minute and a half to make sure nothing gets moved. Don't be afraid to check and make sure that your tail has stayed parallel while the glue is drying. So now that our tail is in, I went ahead and I brought back our rear tail piece here, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting the relief for where the elevator passes through the rear cone. We're going to go ahead and make a cut back on this seam here, and then we're also going to come up about a 1/4 inch underneath it. Don't stress too much where this cavity goes. We just want to make sure that we get down below it so the elevator can have full swing. So our first cut's going to be right here. And our second cut is going to be right about here. The reason we didn't put this in ahead of time is because it would just be too flimsy for this to be able to move. You can clean this up if you need to. Get any extra glue globs off. Do this on both sides. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit here. This should line up through and meet up nicely. We're not going to worry about the bottom section here. We're just going to simply glue on the top section first, and then we'll move to the bottom, and we'll glue the bottom and then fit the bottom plate. Alright, simple bead of glue right along here. Slide it in. And we're going to hold this for a good 35-40 seconds. Don't ever feel like you have to rush. Hot glue gives you a little bit of time to be able to work it. But once you find where it is, hold it there. So that's the top section of the cone. Let's go ahead and flip this upside down. I'll just open this up, and we can go ahead and make our glue joints on both sides that you see right here. All we need is a little drop here, a little drop there. So our next step here is we're going to bring this piece down to meet this section, which means we need to do a 45-degree bevel here. And we're also going to have to, when we tip this down, we're going to have to take note where this cuts. This could be a bevel cut, or it could be a score cut going all the way through where the paper just meets. We won't know until we get it down and size it up. Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and close this plate here. I'm going to take note where it's touching, and I'm going to go ahead and carve that portion out. The good thing is I don't need to do anything with the rear, but I do need to remove a little bit of material on both sides. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So I'm just kind of cutting a little bevel on both sides. That looks wonderful. Once we're happy with it, we'll open it up. Place our glue down. And tip it into place. Just so I don't burn my hands, I'm going to use a scrap piece of foam. Give this about 35 to 45 seconds to dry. Alright, last step here. I'm just going to apply a nice little bead of glue on that paper. I'm going to use a scrap piece of foam. I'm going to bend it up and fold it around and hold it. Whenever I'm folding over a flap with glue on it, every 15 seconds or so I kind of pull it and rock it away. Makes it nice and tight and keeps it from gluing the scrap piece. Get a little bit more glue under there. So now that our horizontal tail section is done, and before we put our fins on, let's go ahead and hook up our servo linkage to our elevator so we have control. So just like what we did with our ailerons, I'm going to be using the ES802 FT servo along with a 30 centimeter extension that's included in our Power Pack C and C twin packs. I already went ahead and taped it just like what we did on the wing previously, making sure that the colors line up so we have ground and signal on the proper sides. I'm going to go ahead and feed this through. Nice thing about this fuselage, you can literally stick your hand all the way up there and grab it if you need. Now for my servo, I have my servo pre-centered, and I also have it closest to the elevator hinge. Along with that, notice that my arm is facing up towards me. We're going to go ahead and drop that right into that cavity like you see here. So taking our push rod and our control horn, I'm going to go and pass it through nice and slowly rotating it here to get a good link. Keep in mind my push rod is going to be closest to the fuselage. I'm now going to press this in the control horn slot. I'm going to make sure that my elevator is nice and neutral. And just like I did on my ailerons, I'm going to go ahead and mark just in front of that hole. We're going to go to the outermost hole in the servo arm because I plan on flying this pretty aggressive and I want to make sure that I have all the control needed. If you're a beginner, go to the middle hole. Alrighty, we're going to grab this about 2 millimeters down and we're going to bend towards us. Go ahead and cut off the excess. Now we're going to go ahead and take our servo. We're going to find the outermost hole. Again, if you're a beginner, you can go to the middle hole, and you can always change this according to your liking. I'm going to slide it into place. Now we have a little bit of adjustment here, but I'd prefer that you move the servo back and forth to get everything perfectly neutral. Make sure when you glue it, it looks just like that. If you're happy with the way everything fits, we'll go ahead and start with the control horn first. Press it into place. We're going to give this a good minute and a half to dry, once again making sure if we don't have pitch control, we have a free flight. Alright, once our control horn is glued down, we can lift this up, focusing glue on the 2 little flanges on the inside, and dropping our servo down into place. Once again, making sure that everything's nice and even. We want a flat surface here, and we want this perpendicular to the tail. Because this is a large model and it's also capable of pretty fast speeds, we're going to go ahead and make sure that this linkage can't bend in any way. In our kit is included a zip tie. We're going to go and pass this through with the knuckle on the top, and we're going to tighten it down so it makes a nice guide. Don't get this too tight, make sure it flows nice and free. And then take your side cuts and cut it at the sharpest angle possible. Alright, we're now going to carefully line it up with this hole and press it through. Before pushing it all the way down, I'm going to put a little drop of glue in and then seat it the rest of the way. Make sure that your zip tie is perpendicular to the wire so it doesn't bind up when it moves. We'll let this dry for a good minute, minute and a half, and your whole tail assembly is now done. We're ready to put on our vertical fins. So prepping our tail assembly is going to be very, very easy. All we need to do is simply dig out these two cavities that you see here. Notice that there is no rudder on this vertical stabilizer. We're going to use differential thrust to be able to steer us and give us our yaw control. Let's go ahead and give this a quick test fit and make sure that we're happy with the way it looks. Tap right here and press into place. You're going to want to get this as close to perpendicular to the tail as possible, but don't worry because our vertical struts are going to give us strength and help us true it up. Alright, with your fuselage basically 90 degrees on the table here, we're going to go ahead and apply a little bit of glue right over that tab and on both surfaces. Line up the tab. I'm just going to go ahead and take my, my square here and keep it perpendicular as it dries. Give this a good minute to dry nice and thorough, and then we're going to go back and we're going to even reinforce it more with a bead of glue around the whole edge. So everything on our tail should be nice and perpendicular. You can go back and check that and make sure that you're happy with it. Our next step here is to take our barbecue skewers. You should have 2 good barbecue skewers left to be able to do this. We want to go ahead and put a cross brace. Now I know the original A-10 didn't have this, but we built this to look like an awesome A-10, but also to fly on a whole different level. We really want to brace these vertical stabilizers to make sure they can handle side loads with things like flat spins, pinwheels, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pass this barbecue skewer from the outer circle. I'm going to slowly just kind of rotate it in. I'll use the pointy end to line up with this, and in a twisting motion, just like a drill bit, I'm going to go ahead and push it in. Now it's really important that we make sure that everything is nice and perpendicular before we glue it in. Once we're happy, I'm just going to back this out. Twisting motion, we'll twist that in. Get our perpendicular. Lock this in with a little glue glob and kind of push it around the barbecue skewer. Sometimes it's nice just to give a little bit of a twist to work it in. Once it's thoroughly dry, all we need to do is come in with a pair of side cutters and cut it flush. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the other side. Our tail section is now done. We're ready to move on to our next step. So our next step here is we're going to be working on the canopy. For the canopy, we're only going to need one piece, and that's going to be the piece that you see right here. Make sure you keep your fuselage close by so we can do some fitting once we get this put together. We're going to go ahead and choose one side. Peel off the back side of that. So we're going to go open that up. Alright, so we can see we have one side peeled, one side is not. Our next step here is we're going to go ahead and establish a curve. Now because these are all joined here, it's possible you don't want to get too rough with it and rip the paper. If you do, no problem. These are just here for alignment. Easiest way to curl this is to take it to the table. And I'm just going to go one piece at a time. I'm just going to take it down over the table. Notice when it's a triangle, I'm kind of keeping that point right at the edge. And I'm rolling back and forth. A couple swipes either way is all you need. And we'll go to the middle. The other edge. The way this is cut on the kit, the foam is made to bend very easy. The grain is running long ways. So you should have no real problem forming this up very quickly. Once you get an established angle, you can also kind of go with your fingers and start curling it in and roll it over. Roll it over a little bit more than you think you will need, just so it kind of remembers that shape. So we have a nice easy shape here. It's easy to mold. We're going to go ahead and start with our two center sections here, and we're going to seam this one side at a time. So we're first going to practice here. We're going to roll this together, and you're going to notice that it forms a nice seam. And what we're looking to do is to line up the very bottom edge perfectly. Make sure you have a little bit of blue tape handy if you want to be able to have this kind of set in place so you don't have to hold it for a very long time. Once you're happy with that shape and you see both ends meet, making sure your fingers are aside, we're going to go ahead and pull a little piece of tape off, stick it on there, and I'm going to go ahead and favor the glue. Now keep in mind that the glue is going to melt the foam a little bit, so don't dig your tip in. I'm going to favor the glue on the very bottom edge, and then I'm going to lap the one side of the paper over the other and hold it together. Notice I'm not too worried about the angle because as I roll this down, it's going to go ahead and let me curve this. So don't worry too much about the angle at the moment. After about maybe 15-20 seconds, you can go ahead and put a piece of tape on there, press it down. We're going to go ahead and lap this side glue completely before doing our other side. Alright, we're going to do the same process on the other side, but one thing you're going to notice here is to bring the edges together, we're going to start holding that form, giving the canopy its shape. So we got our little piece of tape handy to my right. I'm going to go ahead and put my glue on, just favoring one side. I'm even going to use the table as my friend a little bit to help me push down that other edge. And we're going to hold this in place. There we go. Make sure you give this a good minute and a half before moving your hands or before releasing any tape. Alright, so we have both of our sides glued together here. You can see that the canopy is now taking shape. One thing I just did is I went ahead and placed a piece of tape on the very bottom edge to kind of help me hold this in shape as I form my other pieces here. This is kind of going to be the foundation that we're going to build on. So next, let's go ahead and work on the front side here. You're going to notice now that we have our shape here, I can kind of curl this in and put pressure on it. Once again, we're going to go one side at a time, and we're going to go ahead and find that angle just a couple times so we have the muscle memory. Once we're happy with that, we'll come back and we'll put glue on it. You can always go ahead and form this a little bit more if it's a little bit too rigid to make sure it naturally goes there without fighting you too much. I'm happy with the way that's going to bend. I'm going to go ahead and put my glue just facing up here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and roll this down. Put a little bit more glue than I wanted, but I can always scrape it off later, no big deal. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and hold this for a good minute and a half again, and then we'll do the same process on the other side. Sometimes if you have really hot glue, you know you're going against two white pieces of foam, you can let it dry for a few seconds before going ahead and mating up your surfaces. That'll give it a little bit more tack and save you some holding time. There we go. So all of our pieces are done here. We're going to go ahead and remove the tape from the one that we did first and second. Go ahead and open this now. If any of these pieces pop loose, don't worry, you can always go back and retape and reglue. This blue tape is fantastic, especially over our Flite test foam. So now, as you can see, when we push this square on a table, it's going to square it beautifully. The only thing we need to do now is make sure that our nose is formed even on both sides. So that may mean a little bit of rolling here. We want to take our razor blade and we just want to shave this extra little bit of meat off just so it stays nice and flat. You can sand this or you can trim it with a razor. Do the same process now on the back side. Where this comes in, we're just going to take off about a 45-degree bevel on both sides. So now when you push this flat up against the table, just like it'll be on our fuselage, you should see a nice tight seam all the way around. Cool. If you're happy with the way everything looks, we're ready to put it on our fuselage. So lining up our canopy is really easy here. You're going to notice that this main seam of the canopy is going to line up perfectly with the seam on our fuselage. Also, we have this center line from where we folded the fuselage together going right down the middle. You can use that to split the difference on the front and the back, making sure your canopy is nice and aligned. Go ahead and take your time and make sure you're happy with the way it fits. And what I even like to do is just kind of run my fingernail along, giving me a little bit of a reference line. You don't have to worry too much about this because when we put this down into place, we can squeeze a little bit more than it needs, set it in place, and then let it expand out to the point where we feel good about it, and then we stop there and hold it for about 1.5 minutes. Alright, I feel pretty good about where that is. I'm going to go ahead and put some glue down now. Alright, so I got plenty of glue in my hot glue gun here. I'm going to go ahead and put a bead down. Doesn't have to be a tremendously large amount. Notice I'm focusing mostly on the foam. Alright, I'm going to squeeze a little bit more than I have to. I'm going to go ahead and line up my first point, second point, and finally my third. Now I can go ahead and let that kind of expand out to where I get a nice vertical line. Right there. I'm going to go ahead and hold this for about 1.5 minutes, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. Alright, our canopy's on, we're ready to move on to the next step. For our engine nacelles, we're going to go ahead and get the following pieces. Notice that we got a lot of the wooden pieces out of our ducts that we kind of weeded out earlier and put aside. We also are going to have our outer skins for our nacelles and our inner skins for our nacelles. Make sure you have all those pieces, and while we're at it, let's go out and weed out our sections and get these pieces prepared. Feel free to pause your video at this moment, make sure your pieces look exactly like what you see here, and also all of these components are located. So before we move on any further, we're going to go ahead and assemble our firewall. Unfortunately, this plane is not a swappable, but we do use the FT Simple Element Firewall for this process. This one's going to look a little bit different because I left a lot more meat in there just for added strength. If you're scratch building, the FT Element Firewall is what you're going to need to be able to do this process. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and first set this in by putting the top plate and the bottom plate up on its side. You can use hot glue to kind of seam all this together, but I prefer to use instant glue or super glue from our model store. Nice little bead inside there. And we'll let that dry. While you're at it, go ahead and build both of your firewalls now. That way you don't have to go back and do it later. Go ahead and follow the exact same process to build your second firewall now. That way we can move smoothly through both nacelles. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and put our attention here towards the inner portion of our nacelle. This is where our firewall is going to glue down, also the doublers for our wheels. You're going to notice on the kits that we have 2 etch marks here and here. Make sure that you line up your firewall perfectly, just as you see here. So all we simply need to do is we're going to go ahead and put a nice bit of hot glue here. Notice I kept it mostly in the center just so it doesn't squeeze out too far. I'm going to set this down perfectly in place, making sure my leading edge and my trailing edge are lined up. Don't worry if it sticks outside of the outside edges, just about 1 millimeter. That's because we're going to be crushing the foam down to get a really nice tight fit. While we're at it, we can go ahead and glue our doublers right over the etch marks on both sides as you see here. Make sure that you keep the glue away from the holes. Alright, so you can definitely tell that there's no way that this will be able to become an A fold, so obviously it's a B fold. For the B fold, we're going to keep our bottom plate firmly against the table as we rotate our side plate up 90 degrees. A really great pinch point is going to be for you to be able to push with your fingers and your thumb against the wood and the foam, making sure you have a nice tight joint here. Go ahead and practice this joint, making sure that you're happy with it and that this also goes up 90 degrees. Once you're happy, we have plenty of hot glue in our glue gun. I'm going to focus my glue on the side of the bottom plate, starting and stopping about 1/2 inch. I'm also going to go ahead and put a nice amount of hot glue right on the side of our firewall. Up 90 degrees, pushing down firmly against the table, making sure we keep that nice tight seam, and then we can pinch right where the firewall is, getting really good strong adhesion. Alright, once we've given that about 35-40 seconds to dry, we can go ahead and do the same process. Again, always make sure that you fold this and test it and you're happy with the fit. Back to the table, starting and stopping about 1/2 inch. Plenty of hot glue on that firewall, and same motion as before. Up 90 degrees, pushing down firmly against the table to get a good tight angle, and then using our thumb and our fingers to make sure we hold it firmly against the firewall for a strong glue joint. While this process is fresh in our head, let's go ahead and repeat the exact same process on the other nacelle. Alright, so just a quick recap. We test fitted it, put our glue down, firewall right down between the two lines on the leading and trailing edge. We'll glue down our two doublers. This will be for our landing gear. Test fit each side, making sure we do a B-fold where the side plate is beside the bottom plate. Once we're happy with that, apply the glue on the side of the bottom plate and also on the side of your firewall. Rotate it up to 90, pushing down firmly against the table. And use your finger and your thumb to pinch between the wood and the foam to get a nice strong glue joint. Same process on the other side, starting and stopping. A little bit of glue. Up to 90 and hold in place. Both of our engine nacelles are now done. We're going to go ahead and put the outer skin on. So for these next couple steps, we're going to go ahead and use the edge of our table as our friend here too. The first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and place down, and you're going to notice that there's a hole cut out here. That hole is going to line up perfectly with the hole in the lower kit. Also, you're going to notice that when we fold this up, that these two edges are going to also line up perfectly. So once we verified everything looks good, we're going to go ahead and place glue. And I like to place glue on this portion here, but keep in mind, we don't need to go all the way forward. If you do, you're just wasting glue. But we're going to stop right about here. There we go. This back line is also a really great reference as well. There we go. Now what I'm really focusing on is to make sure that both my sides are nice and flush, here and on the opposite side. Give this about 30 to 40 seconds to make sure it's thoroughly dry. Now that our inner portion is glued in, we're going to take this to the edge of the table because we have this part that's going to kick down below the table. We don't want to damage that. So we're going to go ahead and fold this up 90 degrees and make sure that we push down firmly against the table, getting a nice tight joint. And if everything's tight, what we should see is about a foam thickness in this portion here. You're also going to notice that we have etch marks that are going to help you indicate that you're right on track. So once we're happy with that, again, it's the same process as a B-fold. I'm going to focus my glue on the side of the bottom plate. And then also I'm just going to go ahead, go up and down on both sides, just like you see here. Back down to the table, rotating it up. Again, I'm pinching with my finger and my thumbs. Now this time I'm wandering on the whole side, making sure this outer skin's pushed firmly against the table. Just kind of wandering back and forth, getting a nice tight seam. And that's looking really good. Alright, that's one side done. Let's go ahead and do the other side. Alright. The fit looks really good. I got this piece right here. Back down to the table. There we go. Again, I'm just kind of wandering back and forth, pinching it down, making sure everything is firmly squeezed together. The better of a joint we get here, the more durability we're going to have later. Before we take this upper level and start working on bringing the skin over, I'm going to go ahead and do a couple things here. This is just a scrap piece of my push rod wire. You can also use a toothpick or whatever else you see fit. I'm just going to bend this in a 90-degree angle. And right where I have my wheel axles, I want that hole to pass through it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm simply going to go ahead and get it right in the center of that wheel axle and push it through. I'm going to go ahead and do that on both sides. And what this is going to do is just save us a little bit of headaches later trying to find that exact hole, and also that smaller hole is going to give us the friction we want to really lock that landing gear wire in place. Alright, once we've done that, we can move on to our next step. Alright, now that both of our sides are done, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do two bevel cuts. We're going to do a normal bevel cut on this edge here, and we're going to do a very tight bevel cut on this one here. So let's go ahead and do our typical one first. This should be very comfortable for you. Once again, our blade is at a nice angle here so it guides through. Now that's a typical 45-degree bevel cut. For this one here, we're going to want to go a lot more exaggerated because we're going to have to match the angle that you see at this piece here. So for that, we'll start normal. We'll just go ahead and do a typical 45. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and keep cutting that more and more wide. 3 or 4 cuts. You can also sand this if you want. Opening that angle as wide as possible. There's one side. Static. Don't try to take it all in one chunk. Always just kind of chew it out. There we go. The easiest way to tell if you're there, you can see I can even pinch it with my fingers a little bit. The easiest way to tell if you're there is when you fold this up, that when this piece goes over, there's no resistance and that edge stays nice and sharp. Once you have that angle, you can move on to the next step. Then we'll go ahead and place our glue seams. Because we have these doublers, we can now put a little bit of glue on the top of each doubler along with our paper. One thing I also like to do is just put a thin ribbon right on the top that you see here. Back down to the table, rotate it up 90 degrees. You can see a little bit of glue squirted out, no big deal. I can just move that over and we're good to go. Although this plane is a very large plane, it has a lot of steps. There's nothing that you're not capable of doing and having a high success with doing. So don't worry, if you ever need to take a break on any of these steps, just to kind of shake it off a little bit, feel free to do that. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and start forming this portion that you see here. Very, very delicately. Keeping in mind when we get to where the wheels are, it's going to be very easy to bend. So just a nice gradual curve. So when we roll this over, it meets up just like you see here. Once you're happy with the fit, same process as before. Make sure you have plenty of hot glue in your hot glue gun. And we're going to trace the glue here, on the inside, on the outside, on the back bevel, and then we're going to put a bead right down along our paper just for some added strength. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Alright, I'm going to start on the inside here. Just kind of go over on that back side. While we're at it, put a bead glue down. Notice we don't have to rush. And then I'm going to focus that tip right between the foam and the paper. Just like that. Bring it right down over. Keep in mind that the heat will transfer through the paper a lot quicker than the foam. We're going to get down in its little groove. And I like to use the table as my friend. And then roll it forward. Like that. Because it's a curve, one of the easiest things I found is to kind of rock it back and forth. Do it a couple times quickly, and then as you go ahead, spend a little bit of time on the one edge, down to the other edge. Back down to the back edge, and back forward. Do this rocking motion for about 45 seconds, and everything should be nice and dry and firmly seated. Our main portion of the cell is now done. Let's go ahead and prepare our top piece, kind of similar to what we did on the bottom. We're going to go ahead and remove the outer edge on both sides. And also remove that paper. Just like we did on the bottom skin, we're going to go ahead and mold this. Just give it a little gentle curve to it, matching up that with what you see here. There we go. Always a great idea to test fit. I'm going to slide this back here, making sure that my front leading edge here is flush. You're going to notice that the back edge, just as you see here, is sticking over. That's because when we push it up against the wings, we can do a nice tight custom fit, making sure it's nice and flush. So don't worry about this back portion right now. Just make sure that the leading edge is flush with the bottom pit of the nacelle. With our paper tab pointing towards the front of the nacelle, we're going to go ahead and line this up. Now don't worry about the back edge sticking out a little bit. We really want to put our energy towards making sure the front edge is nice and flush with what you see here. Once we're happy with that fit, again, nice bead of glue on the bottoms of the plates here. And also focus in the glue between the foam and the paper on the top plate. Alright, the front leading edge is nice and flush. Everything's sitting down. Just going to take a little bit of extra off. Right back down on the table, rocking back and forth. So you can see here on our very front end we have 4 different flaps. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up the 2 side flaps first, and we're going to glue down the top and the bottom flap. So we're just going to go ahead and apply our glue right on the bottom edge. I'm going to apply just enough glue to kind of squirt out just a little bit, making sure every bit of the paper is sealed. Take it down to the table, 90 degrees, and hold. If you didn't put enough glue in, don't worry about it. You can always go back and add a little bit more glue and use a scrap piece of foam to clean up the edges. Alright, the bottom's done. Let's go ahead and do our top. Can put a little bit more glue just because it's a bigger piece. There we go. And our last 2 pieces here, I'm going to go ahead and push a little bit of pressure as I'm rolling this around, giving this a nice soft radius. So go ahead and just kind of practice that a little bit, kind of get it started before you put glue on. And get that curve going. That's just going to give it a really soft finish edge. Once you're happy with that, a little bit of glue. And press a little bit harder this time. And hold for about 45 seconds. Alright, you can see we have a really nice soft edge here. Same process now on the other side. Our last step, now that we have all the paper folded over, I'm just going to go ahead and take my razor blade and I'm going to trim off any excess around the perimeter. This nacelle is now done. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the other side. We're going to line the inner sleeve with the marks in the circle on the outer sleeve. We're going to glue in place. Taking our piece to the edge of the table, we're going to do a test fold and then apply glue on the sides, holding at a firm 90-degree angle with our thumb and our forefingers. Do this on both sides. Now we're going to cut our bevel. The first one's going to be normal 45-degree bevel. The second one's going to be much steeper, matching the angle with our side plates. Once the bottom plate is in, we're going to weed out the sides and the top piece and remove the paper. Now we're going to go ahead and form the top skin with our fingers, making a nice curve until it fits smoothly on the top piece. Once our piece fits nice and smoothly, we're going to be gluing it down. We're going to line up the leading edge, making sure that the excess paper is pointing forward and not worry about the back edge. Starting with the top and the bottom pieces of paper, fold them in and glue them down. And then follow the same process on the side pieces, but push a little bit harder, getting a nice gentle radius. So at this point we can go ahead and move forward. We can actually put the motors on our nacelles right now. For this I'm going to be using our new FT Radial 2218 motors. Now this will eventually be in a premium power pack, which is going to be incredible. Our Radial line offers about 20% more power, but also gives you almost 20% more efficiency and enables you to fly off a 3 and 4 cell. Everything you need is in this motor kit, and we're going to go ahead and put that motor together right now. We give you lots of different miscellaneous hardware for different mounting options. But what we're going to be looking for are M3 machine screws with a beveled head, and that's going to be right here. We also give you 5, just in case you lose one, you're not going to be out of luck. These are standard Phillips head, so I got my Phillips head screwdriver, And note that we have a 16 millimeter and a 19 millimeter spacing. So we're going to go ahead and line up the 16 millimeter right now and screw it in. We want to make it so this motor is removable. If we didn't care, we could actually go ahead and mount this before we build it, but that would make the whole process a lot more difficult. Loctite's always a good idea. If you do use Loctite, make sure you use the blue Loctite and not the red Loctite. While I'm putting this together, I can also show you, we designed these things to be serviceable and also to last a lifetime. This actually is a serviceable motor, which means you can actually remove this screw on the very bottom and the bell will remove from the motor so you can clean it out. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put my extra screws around, and included in our motor kit is our wood screws. Once again, you get 5 instead of 4, just to make sure you don't run out. But before I go ahead and place this down, you're going to notice that there's a cavity right in the top here. I'm going to go and pass my bullets through one at a time. Now our motor should be able to push right down in and line up beautifully with these holes that you see. Just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to go ahead and magnetize this. This is actually lining up the magnetic domains and making your screwdriver stick. The way to increase that is you can just stick the magnet to it. And there's already pre-drilled holes or pre-cut holes on the bottom firewall that will line up with this. Simply line it up and get it started. So we have 4 pre-cut holes. Line up your holes and screw the screws down. One thing to make sure when you fasten your motors in is that this is not angling up or down. This can happen if you don't fully tighten the bottom or the top evenly. If it is crooked for any reason, whether the firewall is glued in, make sure that you adjust the motor so it's perfectly neutral. So we have our motors in. Our next step is we're going to go ahead and put in our ESCs. For this, we're going to be using our brand new ESCs as well. These are 35 amp, not 30. This gives us 4 cell capabilities, a crazy efficiency, and also has a larger BEC than our previous one. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and make our connections. It doesn't really matter how we make our connections. We're going to use a servo tester to make sure both of our motors are spinning the directions we want, which is one's going to be counterclockwise, one's going to be clockwise. So all we need to do this is we're going to go ahead and make 3 connections pushed all the way down in, and then we're going to go ahead and take our servo lead and we're going to plug it in with the signal wire and the ground wire on the appropriate side. So just like we see here. I'm going to go ahead and take my servo tester, I'm going to switch it to manual, and I'm going to dial all the way down to 0. This is a really important step. Next, I'm just going to take this Luminaire 1000 milliamp battery, I'm going to plug this in, and now when I dial this up, this rotation is counterclockwise. So this rotation is going this direction, which is wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and do the same process on the other side and make sure it's spinning the opposite direction. So I made my connections with the second one. It was going the perfect direction. If you need to reverse the direction of any motor, all you need to do is pick any 2 of the leads, unplug them, swap them, and plug them back in. It'll go ahead and make the motor spin the other way. So these are now spinning opposite directions. We're ready to move on to our next step. At this point, we're ready to install our nacelles into the wing, but before we do that, we want to go ahead and take a step here. On our new premium power pack that will be coming out very shortly, we're going to actually have this included in the kit. But for right now, this is an optional piece unless you want to solder it together. We do have them for sale in our store. This is called a power Y harness. What this is going to do, it's going to pull power from both ESCs and also supply power to both ESCs to be able to control the motors. We need to go ahead and snake the leads through both sides, and that can easily be done by just guiding the wires through and pulling them out the hole on the far side. And there's 2. Our next step will be to go ahead and connect our power Y. Now for this step, you can choose to go ahead and tape this if you wish. And as I pull this wire lead through, I'm going to go ahead and make sure my servo lead is also going that direction, so that way I can go ahead and retrieve it so it can plug into the receiver. So what I've done is I've used gravity as my friend here, and I've shaken the wires down and pulled it slightly, but I've also retrieved the wire for the ESC as well. So you can see we now have 2 wires, one for the ailerons, one for the ESCs, and soon when we feed the other one, we'll also have the same process. Nice thing is all of our connections for our receiver actually connect right onto the wing and stay on the wing, so when we go ahead and join it to the airplane, all we need to do is connect our elevator. Alright, with our connections made and a quick test fit here, we're going to go ahead and line up our nacelle with the far edge right with the wing that you see right here. This is going to give us a perfect perpendicular angle to our fuselage and also the perfect spacing we need to give it a nice scale look and great flight characteristics. So before we go ahead and glue this down, we want to go ahead and cut a 45-degree bevel right in this top surface that you see here. There we go. Now we set this in place, you can see it's just a nice flush fit. Once we're happy with everything, I'm just going to go ahead and apply some glue. Make sure our wires go right down there. So we'll slide it back and forth a couple times, and then line it right up on that outer bend of the wing. One thing we don't want to do is rush this process, so give this a good minute to a minute and a half to dry fully so we have a nice strong glue joint. Once our nacelles are firmly glued in, we want to run a piece of tape in this area here. You're going to notice that there's a channel that allows the wires to kind of follow up and guide into the hole. The reason we have that is because we're going to be installing some wheels on the bottom side here that's going to give us the ability to land, but we don't want those wires to get tangled up in the wheels. So simply just take a piece of tape and run it across there so it doesn't drop down into your wheelbase. So we're going to now do the exact same process on the other nacelle. First we'll tape our power connector. We'll feed our servo lead down in from our ESC. And then we'll draw both of them through by pulling on our power Y connector. Go ahead and cut a quick 45-degree bevel, just giving us a nice tight fit on that top surface of the wing. Quick little test fit. Making sure we line up the edge of the nacelle with the very edge of the wing. Press it in, just kind of smear it down. All my attention is going to make sure that the nacelle's all the way back and line it up exactly with the very edge of the wing seam that you see here. So my favorite way to fly this is obviously as a belly lander, but there are a couple drawbacks, meaning you can't take off very easy. We are going to have a linked video for this showing you how you can put a conventional landing gear. Unfortunately, it will not be retractable, so you'll be having to fly with it. But for this case, I want to show you how to make it so even when you land it as a belly lander, you'll have these wheels benefiting you to keep the wear and tear off the bottom of your nacelles. As earlier, we went ahead and we put 2 little holes. This time we're going to go ahead and we're going to run the landing gear push rod through those holes nice and carefully, right through the first side. I'm going to go and pass this down through. Line it up with the other side. And I like to just kind of give a nice gentle rotating motion, just like you see here, as I push forward. So I'm going to go ahead and take this just a little bit further than I need to. And you can use wheel collars, we'll have those linked in the store if you want, but I just prefer to use hot glue, it's real simple. And just like we do on most of our builds, I'm just going to use a little drop of hot glue right on our wheel shaft. And you want to kind of rotate and spin it up against it. Just let that harden. Notice I have my landing gear wire pushed down about 1/8 of an inch. Once I got the one done, I'm going to go ahead and bring it back and bring this in about 1/8 of an inch. And pull my wheel all the way to the other side and do the exact same process. There. Nice thing about spinning this wire here is it gets it right up against the wheel, but it's not going to chock it closed. Go ahead and spin the landing gear wire for about 30 seconds until the glue is fully dry. Now that we have the spacers with our hot glue and our wheel, we're going to go ahead and cut this. Notice I'm using a pair of side cuts. This wire is incredibly strong, and if you use your needle nose pliers, most likely you're just going to dent your pliers and it'll take a lot of extra strength. So we'll just go ahead and cut this. It still takes a lot of extra strength. And we can even put a little drop of glue on the extra wire just on one side to lock it in place. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process now on the other side. Okay. So now the cool thing is whenever we land this on its belly, we're going to be able to land on these wheels. It's going to keep the wear and tear off in themselves. At this point, we're ready to move on to our next step, which is mounting the wing to the fuselage. Whee! So for now, we went ahead and moved our wing out of the way, and what we want to do is we want to clear out the cavity that the wing is going to notch into. The first thing we're going to want to do is just flip this on its back as you see here. We're going to carefully take our razor blade and we're going to cut right along the doubler and trim this out. Now keep in mind that every wing is a little bit different. We are going to be doing some adjusting from this point on, but it's not going to be anything that's going to be difficult. So let's go ahead and cut this out, and then we'll go straight up from both ends, just like you see here, and take the piece out. One. There's one side. Alright, so now that we have our cavity cut out, we're going to go ahead and do just a quick trial run of fitting our wing in. Now don't be surprised if it's a little snug, especially on that trailing edge there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to drop in the trail edge first and just kind of let this sit down in here. And what we're going to be looking for is wires sticking out. There we go. Just going to look to see that it's sitting down nice and flush. Now you can see if we have to, we can make a couple little trim adjustments here and get everything nice and flush. But what you don't want to do is have the wing continually dropping down, because we have a plate that's going to go over this section that's going to be nice and flush and give us the room that we need. So this looks pretty good. We can actually crush this. This portion here is going to be covered with a plate. But before we do that, we need to give it something that's going to actually help it tab in. That's going to be a piece included in our kit. It's a rectangle with a simple score cut. So once we're happy with the fit, we're going to go ahead and find a piece like this in our kit. It should be one of our very last pieces that we have. We're going to go ahead and do a double bevel right in the center. Now this piece is just a little bit wider than it needs to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and trim this exactly to the size we want, because what we want this to do is act as a guide. Now that we have our double bevel here, what we want is we want to get a nice friction fit so that this piece goes down in here. It's going to be about the width of a phone long here. We want you to be able to trim it exactly to its size. So I'm just going to hold this up, and I got just a little bit to take off. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. We want to make sure that this slides just right down inside here, like that. Perfect. My last step here is I'm going to go ahead and take my my straight edge, and I want to make sure that I have the wing as centered up as possible. And to do that, all we're looking for is to line up both these pieces right here and right here with the outside edge. Alright, once we have the wing nice and centered up here, I'm just going to go ahead and take a pen and just mark on the inside edges here. This is going to be the point where we're going to go ahead and build our little tab here. So now we can go ahead and remove this, put our fuselage to the side here. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and take this piece that we prepared and trimmed to size, and you're going to notice that when we match up both the angles from the top surface of the wing and the bottom surface of the wing, it makes an awesome little tab here that's going to help us align and also give us a tremendous amount of strength when we put our wing on. So what we want to do is we're going to line this up. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put glue on the edge here and the top and bottom surface, and I'm going to repeat what I just did. There we go. Just hold it up so you can see a little bit easier. All I'm focusing on is getting the bottom surface nice and flat and the top surface nice and flat and keeping everything square. Go ahead and give this about 30 to 40 seconds to dry, and we'll move on to our next step. After 30 to 40 seconds, you're going to notice this is really strong. This is going to be a perfect tab to be able to notch into the front fuselage. Let's go ahead and bring our fuselage back in, give it a test fit, and then we'll move on to our next section, which is the filler piece. So for this time, we're going to go ahead and just kind of guide our wires down into the fuselage. And instead of the back end going in first, we're going to put our front end in first. So just kind of slide that in. So now I'm going to go ahead and give a light line right where this back end meets, because this is going to need to be able to rotate down and firmly fit in the bottom. When I lift that up, we have our line. We can go ahead and cut that out. Alright, so now that we know how much we need to trim off, we're going to go ahead and cut right along here. Alright, let's do one more test fit. There we go. Okay, with our piece firmly down on the bottom, our next step is to build our center section. For this, I'm going to move the whole entire airplane out of the way, and we'll bring our center section in. We have our last official piece that we're going to put together, so let's start by simply go ahead and weed out the channels that we need. In this case, we have 2 B folds and 1 C fold. Take a moment and pause the video if you need to make sure that your piece looks just like this. Our first fold that we're going to start on is going to be our C fold. We're just going to fold this over, give it a quick test fit. Make sure you get this back end nice and tight here, because if it's any pushed out at all, it's going to make our fit for our wing too tight. That looks really good. One quick stripe right down on the paper, and one quick stripe right there. Simply wrap it around. Remember that the paper is going to transmit the heat a lot quicker than the foam, so make sure you don't burn your fingers. Take this right up against the table at a 90-degree angle and push down nice and firm, and that's going to give us a beautiful hard edge. We're going to let this dry about 30 seconds, and then we're going to move on to our B folds. For our B folds, our bottom plate is going to be on the table, and we're going to rotate the side plate up 90 degrees to sit next to the bottom plate. Once we're happy with that, come right back down, put our bead of glue stopping and starting from about 1/2 inch, and put a little bit up on the top too. Just give us a little extra strength. Up 90 degrees. And we're going to hold this for about 35 to 45 seconds. Same process on the next side. Quick test fit is all we need. Make sure that we can get this up to 90 degrees. A little bit more difficult with these smaller pieces to hold them perpendicular, but just do your best. Alright, our bottom piece is all done. Let's go ahead and bring our fuselage and our wing back in, and we'll go ahead and give it a test fit. So now we have our wing all firmly in place. We're going to go ahead and give this a test fit, making sure that it fits down nice and snug, right into those 2 notches that we see here. And that looks wonderful. This is really going to finish it off, but also when we're hand launching, this is going to be a really good spot to be able to grab onto, to be able to toss it with one hand. If we're happy with the alignment and we don't need to make any adjustments, we can go ahead, yep, all the tabs are in. I'm going to lift this up. One thing I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to scrape out that, got a little glue glob right down in here that's keeping this from fully sitting. Alright, once our pieces are all fully seated, we can lift this up. And I'm going to apply glue along this whole side. Right on the top, all the way down. Also right on this back edge. Notice I'm not rushing, I got plenty of time. Alright, making sure our fingers don't get hit by that hot glue. Set it right back into place. Square it up and let it dry. Okay, now that this is nice and dry, I'm going to go ahead and lift this up nice and carefully. You can see it's actually a little bit tight right there, so be gentle. One thing I don't want to see is when I put this wing on and off 100 times, I don't want the foam to start deteriorating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take what my last barbecue skewer material here. I'm going to go out about a ½ inch on each side, and I'm going to crack it. I'm now going to go ahead and take that barbecue skewer. I'm going to very gently drag it down in there, just kind of create a little bit of a channel. So I was a little too aggressive the first time. And what I'm looking to do is to push this piece down in here. I'm going to go ahead and glue this piece down here, knowing that I'm probably going to have to come back and trim just a little bit more off. We're going to let that dry for about 35-45 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and just protect this a little bit. A little piece of tape right over there, giving it extra strength. Now, just like what we did on the front battery hatch, we're going to do the same process as before. We're going to go ahead and make a pull tab. So go ahead and this time take about 6 inches of tape and fold over about 1 inch of it. Get a nice little pull tab right here. We're going to lay this down with the sticky part. There we go. That's going to give us a really nice pull tab to be able to lift that wing up. Now, because I put that barbecue skewer in, we may have to trim off just a little bit more. Let's go ahead and do one last test fit and find out. Yep, just a little bit more. So we're going to go ahead and trim that back. There we go. That looks wonderful. Now, to keep this back edge from fraying, we're going to go ahead and seal that with a piece of tape. One last test fit, and we're going to go ahead and start putting our dowels on. Beautiful. Now that our wing saddle's done, our underbelly's done, we're ready to go ahead and make the wings able to be mounted. For this, included in our kit, we actually have a nice real dowel this time. We're not going to be using barbecue skewers for the wing hold downs. We want this to be nice and strong. Along with that also, we have these little discs that are cut in. These discs fit perfectly around this dowel. These are going to be reinforcement discs to make sure that your plane lasts a very, very long time, and those wings can go on and off as many times as you need. So go ahead and pop out these 4 discs that you see here, and we're going to go ahead and cut this dowel perfectly in half. Easiest way to cut it in half is to go ahead and get your ruler, find the middle point. In this case, it's going to be 6 inches, and then go ahead and roll your razor blade back and forth 3 or 4 times, and then you can gently crack it nice and clean. There's no need for the wing in this portion, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that now. On the outside of our fuselage, we have 4 different holes that are very small. They're actually much smaller than the dowel that we're going to be passing through. Go ahead and on each side, pass your barbecue skewer to establish a hole going all the way through the doubler. Do this on the 4 corners. Don't try to pass it from one end to the other. There we go. Now that we have our holes established, I'm gently going to use this kind of like a drill bit. I'm going to slowly push it through on each side. Alright, as we push the dowel rod through, we're going to go ahead and take the discs that we have. I'm going to slide it through each section. So there's our 2 discs. We can pop it through the other end. We'll go ahead and get right in the middle there. Alright, and with our dowel rod nice and centered, we can go ahead and put a nice big drop of glue there and push it against the foam. There's one. And there's two. We're going to repeat the exact same process now on the back side. Slow drill motion, pass it through one side, pass it through the other. Just even that out a little bit. A little drop of glue. Two. So we had some extra real estate on our kit, so I went ahead and included 4 more discs. Now you can go ahead and you can put this up against it if you want some extra durability, especially on your fuselage, or you can glue them out at the very end here and use those as keepers for your rubber bands. Either way is going to work fine, or you don't need to use them at all. If you want to put them up against fuselage, it's the same step as before, just a drop of glue right on the inside. And then I like to go ahead and push this in with a twisting motion, spread that out nice and even. Same process as before. If you're going to keep on the outer edge, just put a drop of glue. Only when you twist it, stop right at the very edge. And another awesome method if you choose to keep your rubber bands on, not that you're going to really need to worry about that, but I know some people are concerned, is just put a little drop of glue at the very end of your sticks. This is a little tip that will work even on our other kits with barbecue skewers as the wing hold downs. Alright, we're now done with our dowel rods and our wing hold downs. We're going to go ahead and move on to programming our radio. So for hooking up the radio, I want to go ahead and take you step by step. I'm going to be using the DX8E. Now this is quite possibly the most bang for the buck you can get, and it'll run any of the airplanes that we'll ever design. I promise you, it's all the functionality you need. We're also going to be using this new Spectrum radio. You may notice it's not broken. It doesn't have any antennas external. Now as hard as I am on airplanes, I've gone ahead and tested this on our Monster series, also our small ones. It has great radio link and also super compatibility. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this. Nice thing is the whole receiver mounts actually on the wing. So this receiver's already been bound. Nice thing is there's no bind switch. It's actually a bind button. You guys can check out the user manual for that, but I'm going to go take you through the programming from this point on. First thing we want to do is we want to program this to be dual aileron. To do dual aileron, I'm going to go ahead and press my rolly ball down, or my scroll ball. I'm going to roll it down to system settings. Yes, I'm sure. I'm going to go down to aircraft type. I'm going to highlight wing, press it, roll it over to dual aileron. At this point now I have dual ailerons. That means I can go ahead and hit back. I'm also going to go ahead and go to channel assign right here. Now because my dual aileron is taking aux1, I don't want to use this for my differential thrust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my gear port. To do this, I'm going to go all the way over to channel input configuration, and I'm going to scroll down to where it says gear at A. I'm going to go ahead and scroll this over to inhibit and hit select. What this is going to do, it's going to take away the ability for the switch to activate the throttle. That's a big safety concern. We want to make sure we do that. So now if I go ahead and scroll over to monitor, you're going to notice that my right and left ailerons are on port aux1 and 2. I'm going to go ahead and take my right aileron. I'm going to grab the extension wire for that. Notice that the ESC wire is just slightly thinner. And I'm going to go ahead and plug that into my aileron port. So you're going to see the little sign that says data. Data is going to be where our orange or our white signal wire are going to go depending on what kind of servos you use. I'm going to go ahead and plug that into port number 2. Right there. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my left aileron servo and I'm going to plug that into my aux1. Make sure that the data line or the data cable is always on the top, referencing just like this. So all of our orange wires are going to be on the top, all of our grounds are going to be on the bottom. At this point I'm going to go ahead and plug in my ESC lead in data port 1. That's going to be throttle. And then I'm going to plug the other one in to my gear channel, which is going to be port 5. We're not going to have anything in port number 4 because that's the rudder channel, and we really have a virtual rudder through differential thrust. The last channel is going to be left for our elevator. Now we can put a short extension so hooking up is easy, but for right now we're just going to go ahead and focus on this. A really important thing is notice that I have no props on this. We're not going to want to have any props on this plane until we're ready to fly. All right, everything's bound up. I'm gonna go ahead and do some mixing. Go back to my main screen just by rolling the scroll. Our first mix to get differential thrust is to go to P1 mix. I'm gonna go down to normal. I'm gonna click it. First channel is gonna be throttle, so I'm gonna click this down, roll it until I see throttle. Second channel is gonna be gear. So I'm saying I'm looking for the gear port right there. Now I'm going to go down to rate, and I'm going to go positive 100 on both sides. There's one. There's two. I want this on all the time, so I'm going to leave switch on. And now you're going to notice that when I move my throttle, that gear and throttle are connected. That's exactly what we want. At this point we can hit back once, and I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to P-Mix 2. For P-Mix 2, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit normal again. I'm going to go over to rudder this time. And I'm going to take this rudder and I'm going to mix it with my throttle. At this point, the number is either going to be positive 100 or negative 100. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and choose negative 100, and that's going to tell me which side I need to go when I give my inputs. And you'll see that in just a second. So let's just go ahead and go negative 100. There's negative 100 here. Negative 100 here. Alright, so one thing we can do since we don't have any props is I can go ahead and power this up. I'm just going to grab my little luminaire battery here and power this up. Okay, so both of them went ahead and fired right up for me. Now, when I go ahead and I give myself right input, what I want to see is I want to see my left motor fire up. And you can see that's wrong. So we have two choices here. We can go ahead and we can move this servo lead over and switch to, or we can go positive 100. I think for this case it's easier just to go ahead and switch the lead, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. First I want to unplug this. Second, I'm going to carefully rock this out. Whenever you're pulling a servo extension out or a servo lead out, don't grab it by the wires and pull it, because you can possibly pull the leads out. Go ahead and pull it by the housing. So now I'm taking where the gear channel was and I'm putting it into the slot 1. And I'm putting the other one into slot 5. Let's go ahead and power it up and see what happens. Now when I go ahead and give my right input, I got the proper motor spinning up. So I give right input, this is going to produce more thrust, this is going to dial back the thrust, it's going to make the plane yaw to the right. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my third mix, and once again I'm going to hit normal. I'm going to scroll over to rudder. I'm going to go ahead and mix this now with my gear channel. And since I had negative 100 on this other channel, I'm going to go positive 100 on this mix. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this around. It's always really important that whenever you check throws, that you're always standing in the right orientation as the plane is flying forward. Now when I give right, I should see this dial up. When I give left, I should see the right one dial up. And that's exactly what we have here. So the good news is we're ready to move on to our next step, which is going to go ahead and making sure our ailerons are working in the right direction. And they're not. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and go into servo setup. We'll hit back out of our mixing. We'll go to servo setup, and we're just going to go ahead and scroll over to where it says reverse. First I'm going to go to right aileron, and then I'm going to go to left aileron. Now when I move my channels, when I push to the right, my right aileron goes up. When I push to the left, my left aileron goes up. But if you notice here, my right aileron is just a little bit higher. that's easily fixed with something called sub trim. So I'm going to hit back once. I'm still in my servo setup. I'm going to go for where it says travel to sub trim. Now I can go ahead and I can select my right aileron. I'm just going to go ahead and roll the scroll until it's nice and even. This is one of the great benefits of having basically dual aileron. You can individually adjust both ailerons. There we go. My left aileron is perfect. I'm not going to need to touch this. Now, depending on how you fly is going to be the deflection that you're going to want. What I strongly recommend is starting off with about 16 degrees and 30% expo. Now, because this is a little bit more advanced of an airplane, we're going to go ahead and leave these full throws, and I'm simply going to go ahead and dial it in at 30% expo. As I said earlier in the build video, if you're a beginner, you want to use the center hole of your servo arm, and that's going to give you just about the perfect amount of throw for a beginner. To do expo, all we simply need to do is we need to go down to where it says expo, and we're going to dial this to a positive 30. I'm going to run 30% expo on my ailerons, on my elevator, and also I'm going to put it on my rudder as well too. Even though the rudder is working through the motors, I can still have a softer stick in the middle, and that's exactly what expo does. Expo takes the little movements in the middle and it softens them up. And as you get more aggressive, it gives you the full deflection. It's an exponential curve. Now, if you're not happy, say you fly this and you want to change your dual rates, all you simply need to do is go up to your dual rates and you can dial this down to whatever you want. So if you're a beginner and you want to have the full throws, but you're nervous about the first flight, you can take this to 70%. And it's going to give you that perfect 16-degree deflection. Let's go ahead and put 30% expo on all of our controls. Let's go ahead and bring in our fuselage. We're going to go ahead and plug that into the proper servo port and also make sure that the direction is proper. I always like to power down the receiver before plugging anything new in. I'm now plugged into servo port 3, which is our elevator. We'll plug this in. Alright, what we want to see now if we plug in the elevator is when we pull back on the stick that our elevator raises up. And that's exactly what we have. The only thing I want to change is I'm just a little bit negative, so I'm going to go back to my sub trim. I'm going to scroll to elevator, and I'm going to roll that scroll until I see it nice and flat. If you're ever too excessive on your sub trim, go ahead and go back to 0, undo your servo screw, and then hop it over one cog. So at this point, we're ready to go ahead and dress this. I'm going to go ahead and power this down. I'm going to unplug my elevator, and I'm going to clean up my wires. Now in our power pack kit, we include 4 servo extensions here. We can choose, if you want, to go ahead and put that final extension into port 3, which is your elevator port on this receiver. What this is going to enable us to do is now when we go ahead and make our connections, we're making our connection and we're not trying to have to fiddle with the receiver, which means we can hard mount this receiver. And I'm going to do that right here. This is going to give us amazing clarity. It's going to give us the ability for the receiver to get the best signal. And also, if we have to do any changes or rebind it, the bind button is right on the top. I'm just going to put a little drop of hot glue right here. I'm going to press it down into place. I'll be honest with you, I was very skeptical about this receiver, especially since it didn't have any external antennas. I'm blown away. I've flown my Monster Sea Duck on this, my Monster Sportster. I've had no signal issues whatsoever. Let's go ahead, put our wings on, rubber band them in, make our connection, and then put our battery in and establish our center of gravity. Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and make room here for my, my fuselage. I'm going to flip my wing upside down. Just checking to make sure no wires are popping out. Included in our kit is 4 rubber bands. I'm going to go ahead and put those 4 on right now. Now make sure, because this is a bigger model, make sure you take note if your rubber bands are starting to get a little dry rot, always replace them. This is a bigger model, there's a lot more forces involved, and you don't want to accidentally have it, break and have the wing fall off in flight. Alright, we're going to go ahead and access our battery hatch. We're just going to remove our 2 little pins here, lift up our cavity, and if your lead hasn't gone ahead and passed through, it's very easy. You can actually reach all the way back and grab that if you need. But you're going to have plenty of room to actually have this have a front-mounted lead, and that way you can make your connections really easy. For this flight, I'm going to go ahead and use a 4200 milliamp battery. This can fly anywhere from a 2200 3-cell up in the nose, all the way up to a 4200 4-cell set a little bit far back. We're going to use our battery to establish center of gravity. Now, as I mentioned before, this plane is going to be forward compatible with EDFs, things like that. What you may find is that when you do something like an EDF mod or a quad mod on your ducts, that you may actually have to move your battery all the way forward towards the nose. So just remember that just because you're flying maybe with powered pods and you convert it later, doesn't mean your center of gravity is going to stay the same. I'm going to go ahead and slide this 4200 right in here and cinch it down. For this one, it's going to go back just a little ways here. Once you find the perfect CG position for your style of flying, go ahead and trace that battery, and right next to the tracings, write down the milliamp. That way, if you ever fly with a different battery that's smaller, you can have individual markings for individual sized batteries depending on how you want to fly. You have the center of gravity instantly figured out. Now, to find our center of gravity, we're going to go about 25% back on the wing just to start here. That's going to be about 1/2 inch back from your second crease. What I want to see is just a slight nose down attitude when I hold this up. If it's way too nose down, go ahead and move your battery back. If it's going tail heavy, go ahead and move your battery forward. I'm going to go ahead and screw my prop nut in and fasten down my motors. Now, sometimes it's very difficult to hold on to your motor while turning the prop. We have these awesome little motor grips that you can use and kind of get up in there and hold that down. That keeps you from scratching up your motor and gives you a nice grip so you can tighten up that prop. Alright, our plane is balanced, our props are on, all the controls are moving the right way. Next thing we gotta do, take it out for a maiden. Well friends, we are ready to take this off for a maiden. It's a little bit windy today, a little bit chilly, but that's okay, it's winter. One thing, if you've never maidened a plane before, and this is your first time doing so, there's 6 quick tips for a successful first flight. We're gonna have that video linked down below. It just kind of gives one final go through. It gives you a chance to make sure everything is ready to go. We're balanced, all the controls are doing what they're supposed to. Let's go ahead and give it a toss in the wind and see what happens. There is something about the A-10 that just makes you smile. Beautiful. So if you're a beginner, you can fly this off a 3-cell, but if you're into aerobatics, you could definitely have a lot of fun with the differential thrust and 4-cell capabilities too. Alright, let's go ahead and just give a little bit of up trim here, surf around. Oftentimes people have been saying, why don't we have EDFs? We will have EDFs in the future here, but when this is flying through the air, you are not going to be sorry that there's 2 motors up in front. It just gives us such great characteristics. Inverted's nice. Even in this wind, we got probably 15-mile-an-hour wind. Even in this wind, it is just fine. Alright, I'm going to go and bring her in here. I'm happy. Next step, we need to paint this. After Alex's awesome paint job, I wanted winter scheme too. Alright, for landing, this has no bad tendencies flying slow. It'll stall nice and neutral. Won't tip stall on you. I'm just going to put it in the wind, slow it down, glide it in. See if those wheels underneath help me out a little bit. There we are. Friends, I want to thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. I also want to thank you for enjoying this hobby. It's folks like you that are building, flying, and creating memories with friends and loved ones that have really got us to where they are. Now, as always, we hope you enjoyed this. If you had fun, post pictures of your own A-10 build. Make sure your friends and family know about it, and we'll see you next time.